We are live. We are live. People, how is everything going and how's everyone doing? Another week, another monumental week in all things law. Let me just get symmetrical here. We're not going to have an ordinary week, I suspect, until 3 weeks after the election, until whatever litigation resulting from the election is resolved. But at this rate, I mean, I tell you, the things just keep going and going and going. I saw someone say the Stickman order. I don't know about the Stickman order. Okay, so first of all, we'll start slowly. How's everybody doing? Hope everyone's having a good weekend. The weather was beautiful in Montreal. A little chilly today, and today was like the first day when you go out after sunset and it smells like winter. And for anybody who doesn't know necessarily what that means, the air has a crisp, cold, emotionless smell to it, and you can really smell barbecues, which gets you jealous. Do I see a super chat? And I can't seem to pull up the super chat. I'm just going to bring it up here. Terry Ebert Mendoza, please see my message about 6:45. Thank you, Viva and Barnes. Terry, I can't see it. If I can't see it, try to get it back in, but don't put in another super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat. $99.99. Magnificent. I'll see if I can find the comment. No, I don't go before 6:59 on this comment section. And I'm trying the thing with the super chats to try to keep them to try to see only super chats in a function. We'll see if it works. Robert's not here yet. Standard openings. Nothing in these videos constitutes legal advice. I should have been saying that one more often. Super chats. Thank you in advance for your support. We can't get to all of them. I do my best to get to them. If I can't get to them and you're going to feel miffed or slighted, don't give the super chat. I don't want to feel bad about it. YouTube takes 30% for anybody who has an issue with YouTube that you might want to know. What else? It is not a right of entry into the conversation. I just try my best to get to read them. We have Utah loves Viva and Barnes. Thank you very much. I've been to Utah very briefly when we went from Vegas to Zion National Park. And it was the most beautiful place I've ever seen in my entire life. And when the borders open up, if they ever open up, I have a thing for the West Coast. It's West Coast Canada, West Coast US. Viva rocks, Volk Revel. Thank you very much. Steve A. Viva, do you honestly think the legal nightmare from the election will be over only 3 weeks after? I actually do. I have my own theory. I think a lot of the hypothetical legal issues are not necessarily going to be determinate on the electoral college, on the vote, on the numbers. So I think you might have some heated debates, but I don't think it's going to be determinate in terms of declaring a winner. That's my, it's out on the internet. I can never take it back. Prediction. But maybe I'm just getting too much of, I'm getting too influenced by Robert. Eric D. Did you intentionally start using the Little Shop of Horrors reference on the same day Rick Moranis was assaulted? No, I didn't. And now that you mentioned it, I didn't even make the connection until now. I was using the Little Shop of Horrors reference because of the Feed Me Seymour. I used it a while back. Then I brought it back because people seem to like it. Yeah, I totally forgot. I didn't even make that connection in my head till you brought it up. Okay, so no, it was not a reference. It was not to make light, not to make reference to, and not even. It was totally, the two weren't connected. Okay, what's going on tonight? Tonight's going to be a big stream. Been waiting all day for this. Let's go. Okay, so the big events of the week. Let's just get things warmed up and lay the table before Robert comes to smash everything or pull out the cloth. Big stories of the week, which we're going to cover now. We're going to have election lawsuits updates because there's been developments which I struggle to keep up with the things that I've been following for a long time. So it's tough for me, but Robert's going to update us on the elections lawsuits. Okay. We have the Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Lincoln Project billboards in New York. We're going to explain it, talk about whether or not it's defamatory, whether or not it can be considered as such. From there, we're going to talk about Rudy Giuliani in Borat 2. I'm doing a follow-up video on that because now that I've seen this infamous scene from the movie, I don't want to say I feel stupid. You base an analysis off description from the news from people who you presume have seen the video, and their description of that video and that scene in the movie was beyond fake. It was dishonest, and they promoted it and they amplified it for whatever the reason, knowing that people are going to see it, and by the time we see it, all that news has already had its impact and its influence. So we're going to talk about that, because I have some questions also about invasion of privacy. You know, when you sign on for a movie, or when you sign on and release certain rights for an interview, what does it entail? We're going to talk about Hunter Biden's, the most recent developments, obviously. And there's some other stuff. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff. Now, let's get some questions here and some super chats, because I see them coming in. Jadon Nava says, Viva, how long were you a lawyer? I still am a lawyer. I have one lingering litigation file. I was sworn in 2007. So going on 14 years. And that does not include the 6-month internship, 6 months of studying bar, long time, a lot of investment. And it was an amazing turn of events that I could use that investment of education and experience and merge it with my passion of making videos and YouTube. So it really worked out. Bring forth the Barnes. He's coming. But this is a good time. To, Ghislaine Maxwell. Are we going to get the Ghislaine Maxwell update? We could probably touch on that tonight. It's, and I'm seeing some comments here, which I can't bring up because I'm trying to not have the stream shut down instantaneously on YouTube. Viva Barnes is the highlight of my week. Saborium. Thank you very much. Let's see what we got here. Okay. And while this takes some time also for the people to get notifications, YouTube is not always quick on the notification system. Okay. So I'm on that stream. I'm on that chat right now. It's going to be an amazing one. What were some of them? There were some really amazing recent updates that we're going to have to talk about. Y'all are worth the watch. Just me or maybe not. Thank you very much. Okay. Roberts and the Supreme Court Pennsylvania ruling. Yes, we're going to talk about that. Do you think the students suing colleges for a partial refund of their tuition have a good case? They paid full tuition, yet can't use gyms, labs, and meet in person. It's an interesting thing. I suspect some of these contracts are going to have provisions that would create exceptions or preclusions to suing for these types of bases. And, pandemic exclusions typically exist in certain contracts where you can't sue for certain damages as a result. Not going to be miffed, Alan Hardy. Thank you very much. The problem with the books Barnes recommends is that you can't put them down. Just finished LA Confidential. That's very. I don't know how Barnes does it, because I think he reads everything he says he reads, because he certainly retains the knowledge and the information. And he is whether you agree with him or disagree with him, he retains knowledge and the context of historical knowledge. It's a beautiful thing. Eric Liebens, what kind of legal action can Flynn take against Judge Sullivan for dragging out this dismissal? This is something we've talked about, Robert and I, multiple times. Nothing against Judge Sullivan. I mean, I think the consensus is he has no recourse against Judge Sullivan. It's the nature of the prosecutorial process. To prove malicious prosecution is one thing, and it's difficult enough when you're dealing with a prosecution. You're dealing with a judge in the ordinary exercise of their functions. What you could probably get in the best of circumstances is, forced recusal, removal, disqualification, but he's not even getting that. So once you're not even getting that, you're not getting anything else. One thing we've discussed previously is that he could potentially sue his former law firm for compromised, to put it politely, legal advice while they were in a slight conflict of interest, to put that mildly as well. So Sullivan might have a claim for recouping legal fees that he paid because of poor representation. That's against the previous law firm, but sanctions against Sullivan, nobody likes it. It's nil. That's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow who think that this is an injustice. I had my first experience on the internet with a large group of people who think Sullivan is exacting justice on Flynn. And I was surprised to see the perspective, and I read through a lot of the comments. It's very interesting. Andrew Hill, I trust the audio of the Borat film as much as I trust a vegan to cook a steak. I'm going to talk about it, man. Now, it's over the top. The jump cut editing, and for anybody who's done video editing, when audio is overlaid after in post. The woman saying, come into the bedroom, was clearly overlaid. I would bet dollars to donuts it was not part of the original. The context was out of context. It was clear he was going for the mic. Some people are saying he tapped her on the back. The context of that was that she felt guilty because she thought the interview had gotten ruined. Whatever. It's all terrible. It's terrible. And I wonder if it's sanctionable. And I see Barnes, who has come in looking. I love the way you guys don't see what I see. I see Barnes before you see Barnes, and it's a magnificent sight. He's got a cigar. He's dapper as always, and it's opportune time to bring him in. Certain videos has made. Oh gosh, sorry. Yeah, I'm aware of it. It's out on the internet. I like Cernovich's take on Twitter. Video that is just exploitive but irrelevant to substantive matters is one thing. Video that is relevant to matters of policy and other matters is another thing. So that's a discretion that that's a choice that people are going to have to make. And I'm not going to bring up some of these other comments here. I can't. Thoughts on Taiwan's independence and the impending invasion of the CCP, maybe the impetus for the latest. Okay, these are big issues, but I'm going to bring in Barnes, and we're going to start slowly with some law. Mr. Barnes, how goes the battle?
Good.
I tell you, I whether or not, I'm not sure if you agree with me. Are we going to have a normal week in law in terms of developments within the month after the election, or do you think things are going to go haywire for a longer period afterwards?
Well, it's going to depend heavily on what happens with the election lawsuits themselves, because remember, I think Bush v. Gore went all the way through January, didn't it? At least December.
In Bush v. Gore, did they not have a formal winner, or did they have a formal winner, but there was a pending issue as to whether it might get overturned?
They didn't really have a formal winner because they were still counting ballots in Florida, and it came down to Florida. And then the legal dispute became, when do they start or stop counting ballots in Florida? And what measurements do they take? And ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court, I think in maybe mid-December, if I recall right, more than a month after the election, shut down continued voting in Florida. I may have the dates wrong. It's about 20 years ago. So
it's crazy. I mean, I was let's just say not aware at all. I was barely conscious of the world around me. 20 years ago, I was, how old was I? 19, 20 years old. Madness. And it's like, we're going to live through it. So you think we might be living through another Bush v. Gore in terms of the duration before which we have a formal announcement?
Could, yes. I mean, I'll have my political predictions. I'll be making all my political predictions tomorrow, Monday, 2:00. People's Pundit Daily. People can watch it either on YouTube or other places. I'm going to be going through the predicting over 100 election result outcomes that I think will happen that people can bet on. So the nature of those assumptions is that we will not have a legally contested race after Election Day, but it's going to be very, very close. And I'd say, what's the chance of a race being contested for a month or so? 1 in 3. Which is very high historically.
It's an interesting thing because, like, my thinking was you might have fights in Nevada and Pennsylvania, but the electoral college, the race would have to be sufficiently close for those legal battles to delay an announcement.
Exactly.
So I guess maybe we'll start with the elections updates, and then we'll move into the other things because we've got some of the questions here. Jesse Martin says, "What's going on with Nevada? I used to live live in Vegas. I don't see Nevada going to Trump due to the Hispanic population. Why are they trying so hard?" So what is going on in Nevada right now? What's the latest?
So the Nevada, of course, passed their laws. For those, just to give you some folks some background, Nevada passed a unique set of election laws that they sort of rushed through the legislature. There's a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor after the 2018 election, and most of the judges, both on the state and federal bench, were put in by Harry Reid's political machine, which was one of the most powerful political machines in the country. Harry Reid also managed to magically get rich while he was in office. One of those unique skill sets that politicians seem to have these days.
Not unique to Harry Reid. It seems to be universal to politicians. They
Oh, absolutely. Harry was just one of the better at it. And so the originally Republicans contested these election laws based on the fact that they allowed for. First, they sent out ballots to pretty much everybody. They said they were only going to send them out to active registered voters. I got multiple ballots at my house here. The other person on there, I've never received any mail for the entire 5 years I've lived here. So I don't know how in the world that person showed up on the quote active registered voter list. But and there were many reports of hundreds of thousands of ballots going out to people who are actually not living at the place that they received the ballot. That
And
was
so
part one.
actually, if I stop you there, and just to rehash, I think we mentioned it 2 weeks ago, but the risk there is that people can attempt to send in the ballots and just hope that they get disqualified or refused on the basis of cross comparison to the actual signature cards. But there's a risk that when you have a ballot, you can send it in and hope that that ballot gets counted.
Exactly. And the second component of the Nevada laws was that they can count ballots up to 14 days after Election Day. Now, the Nevada case is heading up to the Supreme Court, apparently, but they didn't get any relief at the lower level. And given statements made by both Roberts and Kavanaugh, it seems unlikely that the Nevada laws will be overturned. This led to the new dispute in Nevada federal courts, which is the great concern was that the only check left on voter fraud, given that anybody could get a ballot. You no longer had the process in place of making sure that only the person who requested a ballot got it. Didn't have any witnessing requirement. So no requirement that somebody witness that you sign it without taking a bribe, without being coerced, without somebody else filling it out for you. So all of those fraud restrictions were already gone. The only one left, and of course, you can send them in whenever, for up to 14 days after Election Day. You could get them in, and the postmark standards are real loose. So supposedly you're supposed to send them in by Election Day, but being able to enforce that is seriously in doubt. There was only one restriction left, and that restriction was, as you note, the checking the signature on the outside of the ballot envelope to make sure it matches the signature of the person in the voter registration file as a deterrent against at least that form of voter fraud. You can't do anything about people who were bribed for their vote, can't do anything about people whose vote was coerced, but you could do something about people who either pretended to be someone else when they sent it in or weren't that person in the first place. And the Republicans monitoring it here in Clark County discovered that they were not really checking the voter signatures meaningfully at all. So that less than 40% were getting checked and that their standards were very loose. And that was always the concern. The concern was that particular check relies on honest, trustworthy election officials, which we don't have in the state of Nevada.
Well, I mean, it's not to be mean or cynical, but nobody is at this point. People are very impassioned, and you have no doubt to anticipate any less passion from the person counting the ballot who thinks if someone is reelected, it might be the end of the world, or someone actually has to get reelected. But these are the people who are checking the signature cards, and they're doing like an amazing amount of volume, I imagine, on a daily basis.
Yes, because all of the other risks in terms of mail people throwing it away when the Postal Care Workers Union has endorsed Biden, all of those risks, there was nothing they could do about. This was the last one they could check. And they asked to be able to review what was happening, how it was being checked. First, they found out that apparently only 40% were being checked. And then they had questions about whether they were even being effectively checked at all, whether they're being checked by computers or by individuals, what methods were in place. They were getting stonewalled. So they filed suit about that. So that's now the second Nevada suit in place. People like John Ralston, who writes for Nevada Independent, who's a hardcore lefty, he pretends that these suits have no merit whatsoever. And because that the press here, the so-called independent press is not independent. They're in the Democratic Party's pocket, like John Ralston has always been throughout his career. And so consequently, there hasn't been honest reporting on this suit, unfortunately, out of some aspects of the Nevada press that get followed a lot politically. So that suit's going to go up, and it's going to be whether, how the laws get enforced. And that relates. So that's what's happening in Nevada. That corresponds to what's happening in Pennsylvania, where you had two different developments take place. One, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said that you could count ballots up till 3 days after Election Day. That was a decision we talked about last week that was up at the Supreme Court. And somewhat to my surprise, frankly, Justice Roberts flipped his vote and let the Supreme Court Pennsylvania vote be upheld, at least temporarily. And there's already a move afoot to encourage Barrett to not get involved in the case. Because it's back before the Pennsylvania, because it was a 4-4 decision, there was no decision. They didn't have a majority because Roberts flipped. And by the way, this was complete hypocrisy on Roberts' case, because Roberts, throughout all of these pandemic suits, has been the one issuing decisions saying that that the COVID is no excuse for changing the rule, liberalizing the rules to allow people to get access to the ballot for referendums, for initiatives, for candidates. And it was also the one saying that, whatever, and that judges shouldn't be rewriting the rules to do that. And now when judges have done exactly that, he flips his vote, which shows it's a purely politically motivated vote, because there's no intellectually consistent explanation for his opinion. And for folks out there that think, are excited about Barrett, I'll just say, I was one of the very few people saying this was going to happen with Roberts, and all the people who are praising Barrett right now were all the same people telling you Roberts was going to be a great justice. So let's see.
So Roberts says that Roberts was the key vote. I mean, everyone was a key vote to some extent, but Roberts basically says that you can count the ballots up to 6 days after the election.
So the Pennsylvania Supreme Court created that rule all on its own. It was not passed by the state legislature. The prior Supreme Court decision that Roberts had signed on, was a part of, that Kavanaugh wrote a concurring opinion about, said we're not going to let judges change election rules because of COVID. That's a legislative duty. And Roberts himself has written opinions saying that in a bunch of other contexts. And now he turns around and completely reverses himself, because it was 4-4. If he votes with the other 4 justices, it's 5-3. The Pennsylvania ruling is reversed. So this was a judicially engrafted rule that it looked like just 2 weeks ago that Roberts and the majority had come to a conclusion that if it was legislatively created, they would allow it. If it was not, they wouldn't. And now they even reverse on that. So it just shows the absurd hypocrisy up there. It's just a crock.
And with this precedent from the Supreme Court, what does that reflect in terms of what's going to happen in Nevada? Are they going to stretch it to 14 days in Nevada?
So another Pennsylvania case is now going up, because Pennsylvania Supreme Court decided to expand the rule, and this relates specifically to Nevada, where is it Nevada? I hate that sound. That sounds terrible. Why do people want their steak to sound like a lamb, like a sheep? Nevada. I mean, it's terrible. I'm sorry. I get all the comments that say I don't know how to pronunciate it. No. I refuse to pronunciate it like I'm an idiot, like I'm a bailing lamb or whatever it is. I just hate that pronunciation. But whatever it is, Nevada or Nevada, I'm going to keep saying Nevada because it sounds better. People should change the name of the state here about pronunciation. But in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court also created a new rule that said you don't have to enforce the signature requirement. So when the ballot comes in, first the ballot can come in 3 days after the election. Second, the ballot doesn't have to be postmarked. In fact, it will be presumed to have been sent before the election, as long as there's no direct contra evidence to say otherwise, which means that if you want to be complicit, you just don't postmark it and send it in, and it works fine for the post office. It gets counted. And third, now you don't have to check the signature on the outside to make sure it's the actual person who's qualified to vote. So that one is like, it's more egregious, but it's like what they're doing in Nevada. So I think that whatever the Supreme Court decides on that Pennsylvania decision will in turn have a direct impact on the Nevada cases.
Okay, so, but not to undermine the risk or whatever, to downplay the impact. The 2 states that have the most active litigation right now, Nevada, Pennsylvania. I think we said Nevada was 6 electoral college votes. Pennsylvania is
20.
20. Okay, so that's a big one. A few people had asked, Dapper Dave had asked, why is the Supreme Court rendering a decision now when they're missing a judge, when they're 4-4? I presume that even if Amy Coney Barrett gets confirmed, let's just say tomorrow, the day after, she wouldn't partake in these decisions because she wasn't there to be briefed on the case?
No, she still would, because these are all emergency injunction cases. So that's what the Supreme Court continues to take cases, even if they only have 8 justices. So how many justices they have has no impact whatsoever on their duty, in fact, to take cases. The request was for emergency relief, and they simply declined to give it. Now, that's not a precedential decision, and nobody wrote anything about it, apparently. So it's still an ongoing inside debate. But one of the Barrett fanboys, a guy he goes by Shipwrecked Crew on Twitter, is already writing articles kind of hinting at Kavanaugh flipping or maybe let's not let, he's hinting that Barrett's not going to be the savior that everybody on the right thinks she is, even though he's argued otherwise throughout the entire time of her nomination process, called me a liar and a bunch of other stuff for questioning Barrett. So it tells you these fakes are gonna, are already previewing what's going to happen. So I hope Barrett, is a fifth vote to change these ridiculous provisions. We got to have consistent standards, at least. It's absurd to say, okay, if you want to get on the ballot as a small third party or initiative or referendum, then all of a sudden courts cannot provide any exception to the law because of COVID. But if you want to stuff the ballot, go ahead, go. You can do that. It shows what a fraud Roberts is. He was always a fraud. So so we'll see what if Barrett's a better vote. I guarantee you that's what Trump was promised in pushing her, was that she would be a fifth vote to overturn bad election rules that were meant to permit or provide a window of opportunity for voter fraud. It's now the counter is like right now in Wisconsin and Michigan, they've got to get the ballots in by election day. The vote signature requirements are still enforceable. There's a strong Republican legislature in both states. The states do not have anywhere near the same. Well, Wisconsin does not have anywhere near the same scale of voter fraud history. Detroit's a different thing. So what's going to happen is some of this will bleed over. You may see if they think what Pennsylvania, Nevada can get away with, you may see it happen in Minneapolis. You may see it happen in Detroit, where they use interesting standards for how they measure mail-in balloting and things like that. They are not legally allowed right now to have ballots come in after Election Day. And they don't have anywhere near the liberalized standards these other states had in terms of sending ballots out. Nevada will still be the worst. Now, the thing is, it's tougher in the Midwest because there's going to be comparisons. So if weird votes come out of Philly, and Trump has been talking about Philly all last 2 weeks, really, talked about in the debates, talked about it again today on Twitter. If they get weird votes out of Philly that don't occur in Cleveland, don't occur in Milwaukee, don't occur in Trenton, then that, and all the Democrats know this. So the goal is for them to, if you're trying to steal ballots, you want to steal less than 1%. But what is this? Right now, the U.S. Supreme Court has given them the means to do so, unless they reverse themselves this week.
And so someone had asked previously, how do you fraud out 100,000 ballots? And this is also something we've touched on previously, which was the risk for anybody who believes that there's a risk is that if you can count ballots after Election Day, you know which areas are close, and you know where you can, in theory, if you're going to commit fraud, you know where you need to find ballots and where you need to lose ballots type thing.
There's three sources of risk: an individual doing it or organizations doing it that don't have any government complicity, sending in bogus ballots, those ballots for people who actually didn't fill out that ballot. The second group is postal workers. Again, you don't need a bunch; you just need one or two to either throw out ballots from Republican areas or be part of the process of getting a bunch of ballots through that and just not postmarking them so that they'll count automatically now in places like Pennsylvania and partially in Nevada. And then third, someone counting ballots that didn't actually come in, that's in the precinct office or in the election commission. Just 2 years, just recently, a guy confessed in Philadelphia to doing massive ballot stuffing. So the idea that this is unheard of is just a joke. And in fact, you can research Box 13. Great story about how LBJ handled his Democratic primary back in 1948, where they made it where he was an expert in making sure that the ballot it's always about knowing how many ballots you need, because you don't want to steal any more than you gotta. I mean, I know that sounds, some people are like, oh, that sounds terrible. I'm just saying that's the approach some people take. Now, you can live in naivete land and pretend that there's nobody in America who would ever do a single fake ballot. Okay, good luck with that. I've been involved in politics 20 plus years, almost 30 years now. Everybody knows this goes on behind the scenes, or just read the book Game Change, first book reference, and read about what Bill Clinton thought Barack Obama did in 2008 in Iowa. Why did he think that? Why did the Democratic president think it would be very easy to steal 50 to 100,000 votes in the Iowa caucuses? Maybe he knew something about how that game works.
So, and now, Miscreant. I got that. What would happen if they found that Nevada had a over 100% voter turnout? I mean, that's not, given what voter turnout is, I don't think that's a plausible.
The reason why they don't have to worry about it is you pad the registration rules in the first place. All the registration rules, there are every year, when the census comes out and reports how many people are actually registered to vote, it is often 20 to 40 million less than the number of people who are in the voter file as listed as being registered. So that tells you that there's a huge number of people who are registered, who are dead, who have moved, who have double, triple, quadruple registrations. I mean, sometimes this happens accidentally. Someone may not even intend to do it at all, because there's not an easy mechanism for you to notify the election commission in a city or county or state that you've moved. So if you move out, you're under no affirmative duty, and there's not even an easy process to say, hey, by the way, remove me from that old voter roll. And that's part of the problem.
Amazing. So what are we looking for now in terms of the next developments? There's supposed to be a Supreme Court decision this week, in theory. This is going to be out of Pennsylvania to determine what are the questions again that the Supreme Court decision should determine, and is it on a granting of an injunctive, or is it on a granting of an injunction, or is it going to be a substantive ruling?
Well, it won't be it'll effectively be a substantive ruling, but it's not a petition on the merits. It is instead a request for emergency injunctive relief to stay the decision of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on both whether or not the signature requirement is enforceable, and whether or not the 3-day allowing ballots to come in 3 days afterwards and to be presumptively postmarked correctly, even if they're not postmarked correctly, to reverse those three rules. And so, and I assume Barrett will likely win nomination on Monday, will likely be sworn in by Tuesday, and this will be the first vote up for her. So let's see if she delivers for Trump, or if she is the kind of person I worried that she was. So we'll find out real fast who Barrett really is, at least on this issue. I mean, there's other issues I have worries about. I really thought she'd be a solid vote for Trump on this issue, but I'm getting nervous that these Barrett apologists are already coming up with excuses as to why she won't do it.
What is the excuse? What is the judicial justification? I guess for not intervening on the signature requirement. They're not getting into the substance of the issue. They're just saying that it's a valid decision by the legislature, and we're not getting involved in it. So they're not justifying the preclusion or the lack of the requirement to match signatures. They're basically saying it's the decision of the legislature and we don't get involved. Is that the justification for not getting involved?
It's a twofold. Well, the legislature didn't make any of these decisions. All these decisions were unilaterally imposed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Now in Nevada, they have that defense that the legislature passed it, the governor signed it. But in Pennsylvania, none of this was passed. In fact, Pennsylvania legislature is one of the parties suing to stop it. And that's why I thought 2 weeks ago that would be overturned based on what the Supreme Court had just said in the South Carolina case. I mean, what Kavanaugh had said, but Roberts joined at least he didn't write the opinion, but he was one of the yes votes for what happened. And somehow he'd been saying that for the last year when he was screwing over third parties and initiatives and referendums. He was saying, no, we're not going to allow any judicially engrafted exemptions because of COVID. And now all of a sudden, all the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did is they came up with this all on their own. Pennsylvania Supreme Court has been the most activist court in the country. I mean, they went and redistricted the whole state for its congressional districts, opposed to what the legislature did. They've just usurped the legislative role consistently.
But what was the justification for saying we no longer have the requirement to match signatures? Did it have to do with COVID? Did they just say it's too restrictive, not reliable enough, suppressive? Like, what was the rationale?
I'll give a shout out here to Uncivil Law, who did a good view of a case that recently was decided in the Sixth Circuit, though I'm tempted to say circus, like some of us have said in the past when they've made some interesting decisions. A woman was, as just a brief background of it, a woman was fired because she responded to somebody's post on Facebook because everybody at her work center was so offended by this post that almost none of them ever saw or read. That it wasn't a First Amendment violation to fire her for her speech, according to the Sixth Circuit. He did a good rendition of it. The court's interpretation was ludicrous, but it's a comparable here because the interpretation basically that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court made was their COVID was their excuse for allowing it to come in 3 days later. A North Carolina court did the same thing. I think it's longer than North Carolina, maybe 6 days, maybe even longer than that. That too is going up to the Supreme Court. It's probably less impactful in North Carolina, but it's still a risk of how that works. But in the excuse by the Supreme Court was that even though they passed a law to require a signature requirement, that they interpreted that law to have no self-enforcing mechanism, so no enforcement could be allowed. I mean, I don't understand the decision. I mean, other than it being purely politically motivated, I was like, that's the weakest pretext I've ever heard. Everybody knows why that rule is there. The rule is there to make sure that voter fraud doesn't occur. Now, the question for the U.S. Supreme Court is constitutional, because when you have a mechanism of counting ballots that potentially weighs some ballots more than others, or allows for voter fraud to occur, that's a 14th Amendment violation. So that's why the U.S. Supreme Court has to always rule on these questions constitutionally. Is this, if it encourages, incentivizes, and provides for voter fraud, what's the pretext for it? And in the past, they've been saying as long as the legislature passed it in response to the pandemic, we'll let it go. Now they've reversed themselves last week, so let's see how it shakes out this week. But the assumption is that they'll make a decision by Wednesday or Thursday, because we're right on the eve of the election. And the Barrett apologists are already saying that an excuse would be, well, it's just so close to the election, don't rule on it. So we'll see. It'll show you never trust these people again if that happens. But I do think Barrett will rule on it, and I do think Barrett will say that the judicially engrafted additions that the Supreme Court is imposing in Pennsylvania are invalid, and that in turn will likely lead to enforcing the law differently in North Carolina and Nevada, which will in turn deter efforts that might go askew in places like Detroit, Michigan, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay, so we may, if we don't do a midstream next week, we'll certainly be revisiting this next Sunday.
Yep. No doubt about it. It's getting crazy.
I'm just trying to do the math in terms of the states that are going to be the most affected by this, and then see how the Electoral College plays out the night of, and these may become academic legal questions as opposed to the swing vote or the hanging Chad type questions.
And I think that they won't try to send in a bunch of bogus ballots if Trump wins anyway, because say he wins Florida, it's very hard to do voter fraud in Florida now, because the Palm Beach and Broward counties, where there's a history of it, Republican appointed independent commissioners have been appointed to run those counties. So there's there's still a risk, because the threefold risk, just to remind folks, is one is a risk totally outside of government actors, just organized people doing this. There's Republicans got busted in North Carolina for doing this. And I think in a special election, a consultant did. So you have that risk. The second risk is the mail, what they do with the mail. That's what Trump is actually mostly concerned with. That's why he's been telling people vote early in person or vote election day in person, but don't vote by mail. And then third is what the election officials themselves do. So some of that risk occurs, and so you could have litigation in Michigan, you could have litigation in Wisconsin. The Pennsylvania Attorney General is Democratic, is assigning a bunch of people to fight efforts on election day, so he's anticipating it. And of course, Joe Biden, in one of his moments of sanity or whatever you want to call it, said that he has built the greatest voter fraud organization in history.
Someone mentioned that.
Actually, his exact words. So I don't think he obviously meant it that way, but I think it was a Freudian slip.
Okay, we'll end with this one here. Dapper Dave says, based on your previous arguments, doesn't the Pennsylvania state legislature and Senate run by Republicans just have emergency session and change a law?
The Democratic governor won't sign it.
And the refusal to sign based on what?
He just won't. He'll veto it on the grounds that we have to worry about the pandemic. That's the most important thing. We want to stop Republican efforts to suppress the vote. It'll be that kind of language. But that's the issue in all these states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. No matter what the legislature governor split is, one party has Democrats control the governorship in all four. That's why you're not seeing this problem in Ohio or Iowa or Florida or Arizona, where you have Republican governors.
That's very interesting. Charles Butkus says, what to make of the blowout rally attendance and vehicular Trump rallies across the country this weekend versus the turnouts for Biden. Watch the People's Pundit, but Robert is going to get into it in detail tomorrow. I think I keep forgetting to put the link up. If anybody has a link to the People's Pundit, let's put it up. But it's on YouTube. It's the People's Pundit. And what was the other name for it? The guy's name?
Richard Barris.
Richard Barris. Okay, what do we go to now?
So, I mean, there's Biden developments. There's the Google antitrust suit. Those, I think, were the other two in the most highest demand, according to the Twitter polls.
So you know what? We'll start with Sarn0 says, I just found out that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma with the former CIA director, Romney security advisor, Kofor Black, and Nancy Pelosi's son, Paul Pelosi Jr., was on board of another Ukrainian energy company called Viscoil. Crazy. So I guess that's an opportune time to get into the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden latest developments of the last week. For anybody who hasn't seen it, there's a good highlight out, the highlight from our last week's session, going over the laptop, the legalities of it, and some nuances that we might not have ever thought of. The developments this week, aside from some videos that have started circulating, aside from, I think it's NPR, there was a report out that NPR made the top-down decision to not cover the story. Mainstream media has not been covering the story and allowing the rest of mainstream media to write it off and say that it's a nothing burger, Russia disinformation, while not covering it so that people don't even know what they're talking about. Okay, we all saw the debates this week as well. Some good back and forths in that debate. What are the latest developments in the scandal and the impact, the relevance to what's going on in terms of the election?
So, I mean, I think legally there's more and more evidence and information that supports that the emails provide further documentation of what was long believed to be the case and what was kind of obvious by common sense, which was that Hunter Biden and people around him were weaponizing access to his father in exchange for whatever you want to call it, the donations, bribes, political payoffs, whatever label you want to stick on it. There's emails that communicate that. There's documents that communicate that. And the other videos that people have focused on, in my view, so my argument to Glenn Greenwald was, it's like, I agree that there's no, that I don't agree with sharing private videos of someone that are not politically pertinent as I see. And if you think there's underage children involved, you definitely shouldn't be sharing them. That should go to the government and then prosecution occur. But remember, folks, any form of possession or distribution of child pornography is a crime, no matter if you're saying, hey, look, this other guy was involved in a crime. So be careful about that.
Yeah, and incidentally, just to go back to the point made last week as to why you rightly think this computer repairman turned the computer over to the FBI in the first place, probably not because of emails, but probably because of something else that would create culpability or liability for the individual in possession of the abandoned property. So yeah, people's curiosity is going to go looking for the videos. It was the question that we asked in the Netflix cuties thing. If you share it, even if you share it for what you think is exposure reasons, the exposure has two meanings for a reason. So, okay, sorry. So go on.
And so the other component with that is, but I did tell Greenwald, I said the pertinence of it, I said from a if we were in trial, showing some portion of these other intimate videos would be relevant to authenticating the other documents on there if you're disputing the authenticity like Biden supporters are. So they've created a potential relevance of this other videotape material by continuing to pretend that the emails are not his. Now, Biden himself has never explicitly stated that.
The only people, Biden himself has not denied it, has not apologized for it, has not made any comment whatsoever. The only people doing it are people who are just seem hell-bent on trying to make it go away, before November 3rd.
And the media's ridiculous standards. I mean, one of the great things about being a trial lawyer is you couldn't have these hypocritical double standards. I mean, courts sometimes do it, but in a real trial, you can't say, we're going to have one rule of evidence for the plaintiff and a different one from the defendant. One rule for the government and one rule for the defendant. You can't allow that kind of this, but that's what the media does. They have one set of rules when they're talking about Russiagate or Ukrainegate, a different set of rules when they're talking about either Clinton emails or now Biden emails. There's more evidence that the emails are clearly authentic, more emails that they provide evidentiary support and substantiation for what the original accusation was. But the media, and more evidence that the FBI deliberately sat on it and didn't do anything with it, and more evidence that the media will not cover it fairly or accurately. So one question. What I would say is the update has basically affirms what we said last week.
One question someone asked me, and I didn't have a necessarily good answer or retort. Some people are going to say the FBI had it in their possession for a year, which is evidence to the fact that they looked into it and found nothing. There's a fly in here. Found nothing incriminating on it. I mean, how does one respond to that? Or is there a response to that?
They haven't themselves said that. Number one. Number two, they didn't follow up on any investigation that I know of. So it's always a case that you can argue that a cover-up was really vindication. But if that's the case, why deny that the emails are his? Why pretend these emails don't exist? So that line of defense hasn't been, even if you accept all these emails as true, there's nothing illicit or problematic about any of them. It's been pretend the emails don't exist or deny that they exist as authentic.
All right, now American Son says or asks, isn't it true that the payoffs the Bidens are getting are common and mostly legal? So this is another thing where I have these discussions where people say it's not illegal. It's just the nature of politics. They scratch your back, you scratch theirs type thing. Hiring the son, not illegal unless there's a overt criminal quid pro quo. I guess not illegal. So I mean, what I say institutionalized corruption, but what do you say to that?
There's no question it's corruption. The one, it's hard to say it doesn't violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Put it this way, by the Democratic interpretation of it and going after Flynn, what Biden did was 10 times more egregious than anything that was even alleged against Flynn. Biden never registered as a foreign agent. And clearly and in fact, the emails talk about his attempts to evade that requirement because it would be so damaging to Biden, to his father, that his son was registered working on behalf of the Ukrainian government or the Chinese government or the Russian government. And what he was doing was far more Foreign Agent Registration Act covered activity than what even Manafort was doing, frankly. So so that's issue one in terms of legality. Issue two is the people that he's complicit in are people that were stealing nuclear and military secrets on behalf of the Chinese government from the United States, including people that got criminally prosecuted, people that were involved in bribery in China and Ukraine. So the question becomes, if in fact he was paid off to corruptly interfere with the criminal investigations of those individuals or to facilitate or enable bribery, then that would be problematic and potentially criminally punishable. So the idea that there's no crime in it presumes facts that are, at least at this point, are not proven in their defense.
And I'll bring up the super chat. Dapper Dave says, Robert, didn't Joe Biden, let's forget for a moment if he was directly involved, had an obligation as vice president and a government employee that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's brothers' dealings with foreign governments? See, I think
not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, it's really just the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The fact that there's a family tie between them does not by itself impose certain obligations on Joe Biden. It's a loophole in the system deliberately, of course.
Now, the question I had, though, I just watched Giuliani's podcast on Sunday that someone had sent me, so thank you very much, whoever that was. The question that it's the same arguments going back where this whole Joe Biden getting the prosecutor fired, or they don't get the $1 billion in aid. They didn't get him fired because he was corrupt. They got him fired because he wasn't fighting corruption hard enough. I mean, do you have a one-liner or a two-liner or a three-paragraph response to that commonly used argument?
Sure. I mean, one is that the emails show that, in fact, the entire goal was to get that prosecutor off of Burisma, not to have him further investigate Burisma. The second question is, why did Burisma pay Hunter Biden a bunch of money and these other politically connected people if their goal was to make sure Joe Biden criminally punished and prosecuted them more? Does that make sense to people? And then third, if this prosecutor was so corrupt, why is he only the only broke ex-politician in Ukraine? So he's the best evidence of honesty is what happens afterwards. If the guy's broke after they leave office, well, that means he was probably being honest while he was in office. If they leave office and suddenly they're on a yacht, well, it might be a different story.
Getting paid $600,000 an hour to talk about life as a prosecutor in Ukraine. I've been
or be Peter Strzok and get a sweet gig at Georgetown University.
Peter Strzok, I just realized that he's suing for wrongful dismissal. I don't know if I'm going to want to get into that lawsuit.
I have a case related to it because I'm suing on behalf of Robin Gritz against the FBI. She was partially fired because she was allied with Flynn. And they're letting the Strzok cases go forward. They're letting the McCabe case go forward. By golly, let's see if they let my case go forward, because it's going to be mighty peculiar for the D.C. courts to say somehow my case can't go forward, but theirs can. when my claim is stronger than theirs. And if that case goes forward, discovery is going to be happening, and that will include depositions of Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok. So we'll be having a little fun if we get going.
Oh boy. There may be some future material for vlogs in there. I've been hearing that Joe Biden is not allowed into the Ukraine now.
I don't believe that is true.
Okay.
So I think it's been a wide. The rumors get crazy this time of year. So the Ukraine's not dumb. Ukraine's not going to cut itself off from either side. The new president is trying to stay neutral. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to stay out of it because he doesn't know who's going to win, and he knows he's got to get along with whoever that is.
All right, now I'm going to bring up this comment, First Domino Free Flynn, which is a perfect segue into the Flynn Developments before we get into the Google Antitrust. Okay, so the Flynn Developments, I did a video today. There's not much to report in terms of developments except for this Friday afternoon court order coming from Judge Sullivan, which issues an order to the government to authenticate or verify filings that they filed with the court because these filings were altered. Let me just make sure everybody sees that. Altered. Used three... In quotes, sorry, I'm not saying it. It was in the order, 3 times in the order, that the filings were altered because of what is, I think, undeniably accepted to have been a photocopied version of Peter Strzok's notes, Andrew McCabe's notes, with a sticky, which is everyone's calling it sticky, indicating that an undated reference in the notes was something that had occurred apparently between January 4th and January 5th, 2017. So they'll post it because it was undated in the notes for whatever the reason. That was submitted as evidence to the judge. By the photocopies, it looks clearly like something was, overlaid while it was photocopied, but whatever. Sullivan now concludes that that is an altered filing, issues an order on Friday afternoon enjoining the government to authenticate the document under penalty of perjury. Don't worry, he's good. And then what? So that's it. He says do it by Monday, under penalty of perjury, whatever, and to identify the people who took the notes and who wrote on it. So my question to you, we DM'd about this, was under the penalty of perjury, is that a normal sanction for this type of order? It's sort of foreign to me given the type of law that I do. Under penalty of perjury is a normal sanction for this type of order?
Well, here's the way to think of it. For evidentiary purposes in the United States, typically voluminous documents or government documents are authenticated by a declaration. And in the federal system, we have declaration. In the state system, we have affidavits mostly, but though that's starting to shift because it's much easier to sign a declaration. It doesn't have to be notarized, but it's criminally punishable under the law, under federal law, and it's under penalty of perjury. So the normal protocol to authenticate a document is to say, I want a declaration with this document to admit it formally as evidence into the record. It's not usually commonly done when there's no trial. So that's the part that's abnormal. And clearly he believes this ridiculous conspiracy theory, or he's trying to cook it up and manufacture it and push it and propagate it. That is just an absurd provision. This is commonplace. Now what's unusual is that both McCabe and Strzok didn't date their own notes. That's what's unusual. They're supposed to date those notes.
So for first section, before we get there, common penalty, fine, penalty of perjury. Is it common or even heard of that a judge would issue this type of order against the Department of Justice or a government entity itself?
Extremely rare. Extremely rare.
Okay. And now, so he issues this order on Friday. I presume they're going to comply with it by Monday. The underlying implication in this is above and beyond. They've already received the originals. That's the thing that I find amazing, is they filed the original without the sticky note. Now the judge is ordering them to authenticate the documents, which sort of admits of the possibility that the judge might actually think these filings have been falsified on the substance of the filing.
Yeah, Judge Sullivan is so dumb that he really thinks that there's something here. And you have to be very slow to think there's anything here. This is a common protocol, and the only thing that's really here is those notes are not properly dated by the individuals involved. And clearly Sullivan doesn't care about the rule of law. He doesn't care about impartiality. He obviously doesn't care about what the DC court did. That DC Circuit chief judge who signed off on this, he can kiss his Supreme Court chances bye-bye. They just went bye-bye, pal, because you signed off on this. You knew this could happen, and this is what happened. And he was hoping and praying that Sullivan would be smart enough, which just requires an IQ over boiling water temperature, to be able to know not to do what he's doing. But this is ludicrous. This is impugning the integrity of the Justice Department on frivolous grounds. And I hope Tom Fitton, in his new role as on the committee investigating corruption or the ethical conduct of D.C. District Court judges, uses this as an opportunity to do further inquiry. What relationships does Judge Sullivan have with Eric Holder? What relationships does Judge Sullivan have with Barack Obama? What communications was he having through his lawyers to those people? You see, he's not answering any of those questions that were raised by Flynn's counsel.
He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to adjudicate on that request, or he can put it off indefinitely. Certainly,
that's what he's going to do.
He'll adjudicate on the motion to dismiss, and if
ethically, he should do that first, because every decision he makes is contaminated if, in fact, he should have recused himself. This was the problem with the first judge, Contreras, taking a plea and then later recusing himself. It meant the plea he previously took was now invalid because he didn't have proper authority to take the plea. So every single thing a judge does that should have recused himself prior to that point is thus considered invalid and can be considered null and void. So if he cared at all about at least the appearance of impartiality, the appearance of integrity, he would first address those questions. Instead, he's making up Rachel Maddow level conspiracy theories about the Justice Department that he has every reason to know are false, and that his clerks are too lazy or too political to say, hey, by the way, that's probably insane.
Because we discussed it during the hearing. They said, he doesn't want to conduct a massive investigation, just wants to hear the opposing arguments. And now it's beyond investigation. It's investigating, calling into question the authenticity of the documents the Department of Justice filed.
If I was in the Justice Department, this is probably why they'll never let me get near the Justice Department. But if I was in the Justice Department, if I got a subpoena like that, the next day I would have done a grand jury subpoena for all of Sullivan's records to see what kind of contacts and communications he has on the grounds of whether or not, if the judiciary is not going to respect the decision of the executive, no more respect for the decisions of the judiciary. Investigate who he had subpoena his emails, subpoena his phone records, subpoena a whole bunch of that. Then maybe the judiciary would be like, well, hold on a second. We didn't mean what we were doing. But only that kind of aggressivity, and they don't have it in the Justice Department. They're just like a shipwreck crew and his whole crew and his whole group of people that were saying Durham was going to bring indictments before Election Day. He didn't even issue a report before Election Day.
Well, I can imagine the Justice Department not wanting to do this with the rogue judge either, because the rogue judge or a compromised judge can hold the Justice Department in contempt. That he can sentence them to perjury, but the Justice Department can't do that to the judge. So right. It's a disparate. What's the word I'm looking for? Asymmetrical power relationship. Yes. Even though the branches are supposed to be equal.
You're in the District of Columbia, where the grand jury and the jury are doing jury nullification on political grounds every day, worse than any jury did, and equal to what the Southern juries did in the 1950s on civil rights cases.
Now, Pink Sniper asks, what's the I think he means chance. What's the chance of Sullivan being impeached if I write my congressman?
I mean, you can write him. They should. Somebody should bring it up. Somebody smart should bring it up just for political beneficial reasons. They almost never have. I mean, the reality is people that are corrupt up on one side of the aisle usually get a walk. It has to be overt bribery. It has to be, caught on camera, or you have to be a political dissident challenging the system. Then you get investigated sometimes. But the people that are doing corruption on behalf of some of the people can watch a good documentary out made by someone I know who she herself worked at a high level at the State Department. She put it called Plot Against the President, to give full context to what happened to Flynn. It's now available on Amazon. And I would have done a 3-arc, David Mamet style storytelling. All the conservative filmmakers missed this, but putting that aside, it's good at getting into the details of what took place, how it took place, and unraveling it. And what Sullivan is doing is trying to protect the Obama administration's deep complicity and culpability in illicitly weaponizing the national security apparatus to unlawfully spy on an opposing political campaign and to try to blackmail that campaign and destabilize their political power and their transition from being able to achieve the objectives that the people elected him to achieve.
Okay, and now the question on the substance of all of this. Now, we've indicated that there's no good reason. In fact, there's only bad reasons bordering on either negligence or other as to why McCabe's notes would not have been dated, would not have indicated the date for that element, and why Stroke's notes would not have indicated the date of that element. The question I had, and I got into not a tiff rather, but a back and forth with Empty Wheeler on Twitter. I said, what difference does it make if the date range, because this is the argument, everybody, is that everybody knew when the Oval Office meeting was that was referenced in Stroke's notes and McCabe notes. Everybody knew it was on the 5th because it's basically a publicly known fact. So what would be the incentive to misrepresent that as being either the 4th or the 5th when everybody knew it was the 4th? Whether or not we agree with that, that's the question. The answer apparently is that the reason why this is relevant is that Flynn's side, of the Department of Justice's side, by having indicated that the date might have been the 4th or the 5th, can sort of lead to the argument that it was Joe Biden who mentioned the Logan Act of his own volition. That's what Flynn and the DOJ sort of argued, and Trump as well. Whereas it was, in fact, someone within the FBI who brought it up, and it was just Joe Biden parroting that suggestion that was brought up by the FBI, not him. So it makes him look less guilty. Okay. I'm not convinced that any of that is relevant. Right. I thought what was relevant only in the first place was that Joe Biden had denied knowledge of the investigation to bring himself out of it. Now it's clear not only did he have knowledge of it, but he, in Stroke's own notes, was recommending the Logan Act be explored, even if he was just repeating information that was relayed to him by the FBI the day before. I don't see it changing anything. So there's that. I mean, that was the discussion. Is the argument is that if the FBI raised the Logan Act, it wasn't Joe Biden, and somehow is exonerated of responsibility for this fiasco, or his implication in it is somehow minimized, which I don't see. But maybe I'm seeing it wrong.
No, it's completely. They're making completely making something that has no consequence into being somehow dramatic evidence of corruption, and it just does not make sense. Doesn't hold water. And and it is another example of projection. Confession is projection. Accusation is confession. Because the Biden would probably be intimately aware of the Logan Act, because if you want to talk about violations of the Logan Act, then again, I think Logan Act is a waste of time and a waste of space. But if you believe in it, well, Biden's family was violating it every day, because what they were doing was lobbying on behalf of a foreign government in an unregistered manner for which they were not legally authorized by the U.S. government. So that's an actual Logan Act violation, as opposed to the fake one they were trying to come up with against Flynn. And so it's basically doing anything possible to come up with the craziest interpretations of ordinary evidence that mostly shows you just how culpable they really were. Because there's no reason to, if you get some crazy accusation thrown at you that makes no sense, listen to the person, because 9 times out of 10, they're confessing you a roadmap of what they have done. And it's fascinating how clearly that is now true. That's where the Flynn revelations and the Biden revelations actually overlap. What they accused Flynn family of doing was I have no doubt this came from Biden. Think about it. Hey, I bet his son has some violations on Logan Act or FARA. Where did Biden get that bit of inspiration from? It wasn't because Flynn was doing it. And I think it's why they're nervous about it. The other thing is this. Not only is it highly irregular for them not to have dated their notes, Stroke and McCabe, they knew right away to highlight that issue, right? In other words, they knew. They're like, oh, someone else is putting a note on here. We better send it to the judge. By the way, if I'd been their lawyers, I wouldn't have done that, because it's a tell. If Barr had someone like me working on the case, then I would know they were guilty. Because, how did you know to look at that? How did you know for sure there was nothing dated? That meant they deliberately, intentionally didn't date those documents to maintain multiple stories they could tell later.
Okay, I mean, I'm thinking, why didn't McCabe and Stroke date their notes? The most likely explanation is if it's a known fact when that Oval Office meeting was, then maybe it's unnecessary. I don't know how it could be.
But why jump on it? Why jump on it so quickly? I mean, would you remember you didn't date it? I mean, they remembered 2 years later that they didn't date it.
It's a good point. That they I don't know how they got the documents, but I presume that they have access to whatever documents were filed. They knew, they remembered, they brought it up, and what's clear, they send the letter, the unsolicited letter, which is not part of the evidence, which the eve of the hearing back in the day, which Sullivan not only considers, but now is acting on, ex parte communications of non-evidentiary documentation to press the government for something that he thinks might result, fingers crossed, in perjury if they can't authenticate the documents.
Yes.
So, I mean, what's going to happen? They're going to authenticate the documents, and there will be no more delay than that. And then we're going to be still waiting unless he finds something else to go into. We're waiting for a decision on the Department of Justice's motion to dismiss.
Clearly, he's hoping that Trump loses the election. So that's part of it without doubt. And the whole hope is if Trump loses, Durham goes away, Barr goes away, and the Trump has to pardon Flynn to resolve it that side. That's the objective.
Okay. And now Chewy says, just watched Plot Against the President with a Dem friend with an open mind. They said that no bad actor outlined in the film, notably Schiff, being punished shows its debunk. How to respond?
The existence of corruption is not the proof of innocence. So that would be my view. In other words, whenever I hear that, hey, the fact that somebody got away with it means they didn't do it, not normally. So the fact that all of these people, Schiff just lied repeatedly. It was obvious at the time, by the way. I mean, one of the good points Republican congressman made was he said, look, you can't disclose what you just heard in there. So if you go out talking about what you just heard in there, the only way it's not a crime is if you're lying because you're not truthfully disclosing what you heard in there. So everybody in the media knew Schiff was lying. They knew if Schiff had actually seen evidence of collusion, he couldn't disclose it. So the only way he could say, I've seen evidence of collusion, was if it was a lie. Otherwise, that was a crime. And so they all knew it. They're all in on it. They're all guilty of it. They're all culpable of it. So it was extraordinary, but that's how the system protects itself. And it goes go through the whole American history of any populist, any that has achieved any power at any level. They have been targeted for massive levels of harassment, they and everyone around them. And what the movie did a very good job of, I mean, people say they have an open mind. They don't really. Okay. This is my view of elections. People make up their mind a year in advance. Do you guys have jury trials in Canada or just bench trials?
We have jury trials for criminal matters, not for civil matters.
Now, do you believe any juror who tells you, "Oh, I'm totally impartial, nothing, I have no biases whatsoever coming into this case"?
I'll give someone the benefit of the doubt, but you need to see it in action. My only issue is people say, they say I have no, there was no conviction, therefore, that's proof that it's a debunk, and yet people still believe that the same people who say no conviction here because they're my guys still believe that Trump is guilty of something, even though there's been not exoneration, but there's been no conviction, throughout. They say by mere virtue of the fact that there's smoke, there's fire when it comes to my adversary. When it comes to me, if there's smoke and there's no fire, well, there's no conviction. So, innocent until proven guilty. It's just the double standard of bias reasoning.
No doubt about it. And for people out there, it's just when I go through voir dire, 90% of jurors say they will have no bias. Many of them honestly think that, but it's never true. Every single one of us walks in with bias. The way I used to describe it is we are all governed by motivated reasoning. So motivation is the master of reason. Reason is never the master of motivation. And if you want to improve your reasoning, change your motivation. This is what legal education is really largely supposed to be about. Okay, you're going to be the plaintiff today, then you're the defendant tomorrow, you're arguing for the government today, you're arguing for the defendant tomorrow, whatever it is, you have to take the position of the opposite side because the legal system understands that motivation is going to control your reasoning. So the better way to improve your reasoning is to change and shift your motivation. But everybody has biases, and often they just don't know what those biases are. They don't know how they'll play out. The worst kind of juror is a juror that's unaware of his biases. The best, I'll take any juror that tells me they're biased. I'll take, because that reveals a degree of self-awareness that they'll filter that. They'll be conscious of it. They'll be concerned about it. It's the juror that tells me, oh, no, I'm totally impartial. They're never totally impartial. And in part, it's because human beings are not good at judging their own lack of bias. All of us are biased. So, I mean, I wouldn't sit me in a lot of cases. I mean, if I was on the government side, that's for sure. I'm going to be highly skeptical. So, it depends on the nature, but we all have biases. And so the idea that we don't is nonsense. But what happened, what if someone watches Plot of the against the President who doesn't have any political bone to pick whatsoever, they're going to recognize the problem of what took place there. Like if you had a truly impartial jury, but everybody else is partial and they filter the information the way they want to.
So, okay, but I think that's it with Sullivan. It's just, it goes on, and we'll get a decision or we won't. And
it's an embarrassment. If I was on the left, if I was on the side of attacking Flynn, I would find it embarrassing that this continues to happen. This is embarrassing to the rule of law. It's leading more and more conservatives to wake up to how biased our judiciary is, to how bad our legal system often operates.
All right, I'm going to read this one from Little Rock, and then we're going to move on to the next subject, which is going to be a good one. Little Rock, I watch Viva, Fry, and Steven Crowder religiously. Do you guys, aka Viva and Barnes, believe he will release his lawyer on YouTube using Thomas's recent opinion on Section 230? I'm not sure I get the reference to the numbers, but I don't know what the deal is with Crowder and his lawyer.
Yeah, he calls his lawyer half Asian lawyer. So in case people think Little Rock came up with that. No, that's what Steven Crowder calls him. It's whether or not, Crowder obviously could have some claims because he's been demonetized, his algorithm has been driven down. And so it's whether or not Thomas's roadmap opens up the door for his kind of claim, of a kind of consumer fraud, unjust enrichment kind of claim. Okay. So clearly he could be one of those people to pursue it. So I think that, someone who's been the victim of some form of consumer fraud, unjust enrichment, by any of these people, and will be a good transition in the Google antitrust. That too opens the door. People could use that as a roadmap. That now that will more specifically apply. Well, I should change it. It'll in part apply most pertinently. I don't know if that's a word either, but people can tell me in the comments below. But the effectively to people who are competitors with Google, but technically, antitrust law is about you as a consumer losing a lot of rights and opportunities. So I think a lot of people could piggyback off of the Department of Justice's suit and bring their own antitrust claims. So I hope that between the Section 230 announcement by Thomas and the Justice Department's antitrust suit, that does produce a legal roadmap to go after him. Though I think Trump probably needs to win to have the political cover for those lawsuits to succeed.
It's very interesting, and if Crowder did it, it would certainly be it would make for content for an indefinite period of time. So it would be a win-win for Crowder. Okay, so let's do it now. We'll get into the Google antitrust. So I wasn't, I was familiar with antitrust law. Not that I'm hyper familiar with it now. I know more about it now than I did before doing the video. It's a very interesting thing. For anybody who doesn't know, antitrust lawsuit against Google by the government and 13 states, claiming that they are effectively they are a monopoly. They're using their monopoly power to maintain and grow that monopoly, stifle any potential competition, and that there's no room for innovation, yada yada yada. Bottom line, they use the billions of dollars that they get yearly from their monopoly to ensure that they retain their monopoly, which is in theory exactly what antitrust law and the Sherman Act was intended to regulate against or to prohibit. So government suing, seeking unspecified relief, but it's reorganizing and whatever. The question is this: a lot of people were pointing out, rightly so, that even the penalties under the Sherman Act are themselves less than what Google already pays Apple, Samsung, and all the other players who get their cut of the monopoly to maintain their monopoly. So barring I guess penalties are one thing. This is going to hinge on a successful restructuring if they succeed on the claim.
Yes. So the whole history. It's fascinating. You did a good job in your video of going through what the law actually says. Sherman Act was passed in 1890. The Clayton Act amended it in 1914, and they have had a few amendments since then. It was partially a product of this book behind me called The Populist Moment by Lawrence Goodwin. The word populist came into form then in the movement of the late 1880s by working class, middle class folks, farmers and laborers all across America, because of the problem of monopolies in particular, but other problems too. The railroads, the corruption of government that was just so brazen by these institutional players, the big trusts, the big banks, the big businesses that were we became the the caricature, but also the character of the Gilded Age of the 1920s. But that even started before then, the 1880s, 1890s. And the Sherman Act is very broad. You read that language. And by the way, this will be another example where Justice Roberts, maybe Justice Kavanaugh, probably Justice Barrett, will not interpret the law as written. Because if you can read, there's another great recent book, guy on the left, Matt Stoller, called Goliath, which gets into the history of antitrust actions. The law, Sherman Act, says you can't monopolize, period. It doesn't say, oh, you can have a monopoly that's created by just natural market conditions. That's not in there. It says you cannot monopolize, period. You cannot have anti-competitive contracts, period. That's how the law was supposed to be done. Almost as soon as it was passed, the U.S. Supreme Court, the legal academy, the legal judges, the big corporate law firms, all decided to reinterpret the plain, obvious language of this statute and completely gut its meaning. To say, oh, no, it only applies in this context, and then only in this context, and then only in this context, which was further gutted by the Rehnquist court. And this is where conservative judges have been bad. Conservative, that's when people tell me they're all originalist and they just follow the law. I don't know of a single one who's done that consistently, either on the left or the right. Scalia didn't either, folks. I can give you half a dozen examples where he completely got the original, where if he was following originalism, it would have rejected what he did. Where if he was following the statute for what it says, he didn't follow what it says. And I guarantee, put it this way, one of the reasons why Barrett has coasted through is because big tech and big business believe she is a guaranteed vote for their side. Matt Stoller wrote an article about it. He said, you know what's going to stop the antitrust actions? The appointees that Trump himself put on the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, I think he's going to be wrong about Gorsuch. I think Gorsuch is going to be more legit in this capacity, but Kavanaugh is an open question. And the belief is, maybe they're wrong, but the belief is that Barrett will undermine the enforceability of antitrust law. So with that, our law is supposed to be written so that monopolies don't exist, period, and then anti-competitive agreements don't exist, period. Unfortunately, almost all of that has been gutted by the judges and the legal academy. And they have amended the statute without legislative consent. Now, with that caveat, what they've done is they've said that if you tie, what's called tying, if you use your monopoly to gain economic advantages in areas where you don't have a natural monopoly, then that's abusive monopoly behavior, and we can stop it. We can break up your business. We can do a whole bunch of things. And the biggest test case for this was Microsoft, and it worked. So even though Microsoft didn't pay they did pay some fines and whatnot, but the biggest effect was Microsoft was about to dominate the internet. Microsoft was leveraging its control over desktop software to require that its web browser be the sole web browser for the world. And they were close to achieving it. In fact, Gates has bitterly complained about this ever since. So you played a nice little excerpt of his deposition.
Oh, God. I was going to play more, but I didn't want to look like I was picking on Gates. His deposition was the weirdest thing I've seen in a while and did not give me faith in him as an individual, to the point where now people are placing such faith in him as an individual. But that's a separate issue. But what I was about to say was Gates. It had to do with Gates. Oh, I'll remember in a second.
I mean, that was David Bowie's, who I have problems with otherwise because of his political connections. But one of his best cases was the government hired him as a private counsel to take the antitrust case against Microsoft. I knew about that case was coming years before, because defense contractors had complained to me when I was in the software business space that Gates was monopolizing too much influence, and that the rumor was he had built a backdoor into software. What that meant was he had a backdoor in anybody who was using it, and high-ranking government national security agencies were using it. And they were not very happy when they found out what Gates had done. So that's why they've decided to also, of course, Gates was an abusive monopolist to the nth degree.
And now I remember what I was going to ask. It was that okay, the initial ruling would say the initial judge, Judge Jackson, and there was a whole history that I didn't get into in that video that maybe if you want to get into it now, it might be interesting, but maybe too much of a tangent. But he issued the findings of fact, conclusions of fact, conclusions of law, and they overturned his order to break up the company, as far as I understood, and it was pending appeal, but they settled the dispute. So we don't actually know what remedy the courts would have imposed, even on appeal. I mean, that's the ultimate conclusion. He was found to be in violation of the Sherman Act, but we don't know if the courts would have ever ordered the breakup. Not that I.
And that's because it achieved their real objective. Because their real goal was to get Microsoft out of competition in the internet space. And Microsoft's browser disappeared. Their search engine is a tiny share of the market. The reason why today Google exists to the scale that it does, and lesser extent Facebook and Twitter, but Google in particular, is because of that antitrust. That's the kind of the irony. Google only exists at the scale they do because of the antitrust action against Microsoft to keep Google out of that space. And now, of course, Microsoft's precedent is being used against Google. There's no question that Google is, well, by the plain language of the law, they've all been patently violating it for a long time. But putting aside the plain language of the law, even under these ludicrous restrictions that have been imposed on the anti-monopoly, antitrust laws, and they're called antitrust because the first monopolies were big trust, and that's how they were getting around things. You can go back and watch the rise of what's it called? I actually have it. I wrote it down just in case. It's called How Big Oil Conquered the World by Mr. Corbett, which goes into some of this history of the antitrust, how they did it with big trust. There's a documentary on Standard Oil that's good. There's also a good, actually Nader co-authored a book called Hidden History of Monopolies. There's two good movies called The Founder, which is about McDonald's, and the other is called Tucker, about a guy who was the victim of the big three auto industry, who are later versions of monopolies that unfortunately were not legally dealt with properly. But so those are all examples of it. But so even by those terms, clearly Google's been violating it. What Google did is use their monopoly in one space to create an economic advantage in another space. So that's how they limited our courts arbitrarily, artificially, against the plain language of the statute, limited our monopoly language to just things like time. But Google has been doing tons of that. I mean, when people think Google just naturally they don't have a natural monopoly. They manipulated a whole bunch of things where they have disparate influence, that they own Android, so that they have force-fed this monopoly into the public. So that when you open up your phone or your laptop or your tablet or anything else, Google is the first search engine that comes up. That's not a coincidence. That's because they require it and compel it. So I think their goal is to stop Google from tying and remove their ability to leverage this degree of influence, and maybe sell YouTube. I think that may be a secondary objective. Now, there's a high-ranking Justice Department official. I haven't talked to him about this case, but he's an old friend of mine. He's a lefty, but he's a brilliant, brilliant mind. So there's people that think that everybody at the Antitrust Division is really in the pocket of. He's not. He's not there to work for big corporations. He was offered every big corporate gig you could give, turned every single one of them down. He just wanted to see whether they would offer him a job, so he went through the interview process. But pure genius, one of the great, brilliant minds I've ever met in the law. And so if he's involved in this case, then the Justice Department has a very good shot.
So now, one question I had reading the Microsoft outcome, the initial order that was overturned. So they order the breakup. I mean, the breakup, everyone thinks breakup is the end, the be all and end all of the government sanctions. How would that work, practically speaking? You break up, what was it, Internet Explorer from, I forget what the companies are, but you break them up. Does that mean that you can have no overlapping shareholders, no overlapping directors? Does it change anything at the end of the day? Hypothetically, break up YouTube from Google. Okay, fine, they'll be making money in two different entities. The government will tax them as two different entities. But to the extent that they can't prohibit overlapping shareholders, overlapping directors, so you just have two companies that are the same company but in two different corporate entities. What does it change?
So the best historical example is what happened to Standard Oil. They technically lost at the U.S. Supreme Court. But if you watch How Big Oil Conquered the World by Patrick Corbett, you will see that, or maybe Corbett, you will see that, in fact, Rockefeller anticipated that and managed to profit even more from it. So yes, there's a lot of devil in the details when it comes to this. But, you know, if the lawyer that is my old friend is part of this case, and there's reason to believe he would be, he knows that history well. He was a history guy before he was a lawyer. So he planned on going to getting his PhD in history. So he is very, very skilled at anticipating things like that and may find ways to curtail that. I think, again, their main practical objective is reduce Google's dominance and stop their tying this. I'm going to tie one monopoly to try to create another monopoly. And I think that they have a fair chance at achieving that. Now, Google has corrupted so much of DC that it's going to depend on how the judge does things and of politics across the country. So much of the legal academy seat is really in their pockets. And like I said, they believe that Barrett is going to be supportive of their position to limit monopoly law. Now, I hope they're wrong, but in the end, it's probably going to be a Supreme Court decision. But there's some, if the people I think are involved in this, and there's reason to believe they are based on the nature of the writing, they have a very good argument, and they're going to find a lot of, Google putting things in there like, let's not use these kind of words because people might misinterpret them.
The thing that I found, truly fascinating that I didn't ever fully appreciate is that, correct me if I'm wrong, actually, they install apps that cannot be deleted. Now, people don't appreciate that it's not a question of going to DuckDuckGo or using whatever to from what I've been told, I haven't tried, even to put one of those as your default browser is not a 2-click or 3-click step. It's like 5, 10, 15-click steps, even if you can successfully do it. The problem is some of these apps are undeletable, and they still continue to collect the information that that Google uses to then market to maintain its monopoly. So they can't be prejudiced because of their position right now, even if even if the apps are not functional, or even if you do get another browser as your default, they still have undeletable apps that aside from owning prime real estate, as they described it in the suit, from what I understand, can still gather the very information that Google uses to sell advertising. So it really is very cool. I don't see what the practical solutions could be. Breaking them up, I don't know. Find them into non-existence. I see a lot of people in the chat. They're saying the internet should be declared a utility. What does it do? I don't even know how that happens. How would the internet become a utility?
It would become federally regulated like phone lines, but there's a lot of, how much that would, there's a lot of doubt on at least some circles that would end up achieving the net benefit people wanted to achieve. Because the problem would be, yes, okay, then certain restrictions would apply to it, but then you have regulatory capture problems. And people like Google are very good at capturing the entities they're supposedly regulating them, and then they become a tool of Google rather than a means of checking Google. So I think that would be some of the issues. Someone like Nader would be in favor of regulatory control. My argument with him was those agencies almost always end up captured by the various groups that you're trying to control. So now here's my view. I think use the legal pressure, political pressure of the lawsuit, which I think can change things dramatically if done correctly, because it worked in Microsoft. Nobody had disciplined anybody in the antitrust environment forever until that Microsoft suit. And they actually did stop one of the greediest, most vicious billionaires in the world, Bill Gates, complete liar. Just now, I'll give David Bowie's credit. He just exposed him for what a complete lying fraud he was. If you want to see a deposition of a lying fraud, watch the deposition of Bill Gates. What does that word mean? I'm not sure that word means that word. Are you sure it means that word?
It was worse than Bill Clinton's. That depends on what your definition of is. It was the most stomach churning evasiveness and dishonesty you'd see in a witness anywhere. And like people now, I don't think that people don't ever change. I just tend to think they rhyme with their past selves. People would be well served to understand who Bill Gates was 20 years ago when assessing what he is and what he's doing now. I mean, that's just to understand an individual. It was, I may do it was just such a long deposition, and the behavior was so peculiar, but it was so evasive, so dishonest, and he got railed. I'm too young to remember, but he got reamed at the time. And
David Bowie's just destroyed him. His arrogance was his problem. He didn't prep for that deposition well. He thought, hey, I can do what I want. I can da-da-da. And David Bowie's a great, very skilled lawyer. I have problems of how he shows up magically in certain cases. But always been a very skilled lawyer. He wears sneakers in the courtroom like I sometimes do, or used to drive lawyers crazy. They'd see the sneakers like, what are you doing with the sneakers? What are you doing? It was, this is fun. I was like, this is great. But there was tactical reasons to do it. But yes, it's a great example. And also, how do you take apart an evasive witness without ever even sounding hostile? That David Bowie's deposition, I use it as a educational tool for young lawyers. Say, watch this. Now there's I worked for a plaintiff's lawyer. It was even better than Bowie's. He was brilliant. Just brilliant. Cases he managed to set up to win. he's not happy with me because I left. So, but that's another story. Trophies were supposed to stay in the cabinet, not walk out the door. And I was like the brain trophy on the wall. He had some other trophies. We won't get to that. But brilliant, just for that, and to show you who Bill Gates really is. It's very educational. But I think here's the technological tool that may help. I do believe that blockchain has the potential revolutionary capability to go at the issue you're talking about, that all of this is about monetizing people's private information, often without their consent. And like, that's where like people say, oh, Bob, the internet's free. No, it's not. They're taking my private information that's making them richer than they're making me without my formal consent, really meaningfully in the process. That became clear to me when I started talking about voter files, and people are like, hold on a second. They know about who I subscribe to. It's like, pal, they know a lot more than that. There's a reason those advertisements seem directed exactly at you when you get them on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. And so the internet. I mean, just do a Google search. How is it that magically certain ads keep popping up over and over again? It's because they know exactly who you are.
It's over the top, and I have a running gag with one of my kids where I say, like, let's, as a joke, talk about something that none of us have ever talked about before, and watch an ad pop up later on in our feeds. And I mean, I the problem is sometimes I don't remember if we've actually searched for it in Google, but the last thing that came up were these stupid these like one-piece warm blankets that we were talking about, and then, sure enough, see an ad come up later. And to me, there's no question. I don't think it's conspiracy thought anymore. I think it's just common sense.
The whole basis of their valuation. The whole basis of their valuation is privatized information. It's not that they have a unique advertising access just because of the existence of their platform and the number of their subscribers. It's because they can tell an advertiser exactly which audience to reach, which they can only do because they know tons of information. It's why they want you to like things. Hey, do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this? Because you're giving your personal information.
And react to, and how are you feeling today? It's, first of all, not my real name says Viva. VF has Siri in his house. I have Siri. I've just come to grips with the fact that I am constantly being recorded, even when my phone is off. I've thought this for a long time. I've always acted like this. It's sort of a quasi-religious way of acting, like, God is always watching. Right now, I take for granted that Google has 24/7 of everything that happens in my house. And I mean,
I put it in my movie room, and I figured out it can't tell the difference. So like, it'll also like weirdly respond to the movie at different times. It'll all of a sudden start speaking. And I was like, whoa. Then I was like, oh, this is great. They'll be getting all this false intel. They'll be thinking these characters in the show are me. I was like, okay, this is a useful disinformation campaign to the Google aggregators.
Robert, we're on the same wavelength. I was literally doing a Zoom call with people, and I was talking about how in my videos, when I, as a joke, say, hey, I don't want to do it right now, SIRI, everyone says, don't do that. My phone comes up when you do that in your videos. And so I did. I'm on a Zoom call. I was like, hey, guys, watch this. And I say, hey. And then I ask a humorous question, just so that will now be in everyone else's search engine the next time. It's an amazing thing. I don't think people really understand how Google works. I certainly don't understand what they're doing to maintain the monopoly. They own it, and there's nothing anybody can ever do. Everybody says, go build your own platform, whatever.
That's not the only potential threat. Would be blockchain. If all of our information could be owned by blockchain, then the way blockchain technology works, at least has the conceptual capability to prevent anyone from monetizing that information without our consent. And so it's the same reason why the music industry was trying to explore using blockchain, because it would prevent the misapplication of royalties. And so that anytime their song was played, they would almost have to get paid due to how the technology works. So blockchain, for people who don't know, is the basis of Bitcoin. So blockchain has the revolutionary capacity, at least in theory, to take back our control of our personal information away from big tech. And I think that may be the technological solution if it goes in certain directions.
Well, or I forget. I think it was, first of all, Ramtab, thank you very much. Or I think it was in Estonia that was one of the first European countries to declare personal data a private property that can't be gathered without consent. Are we too late for that now?
No, and what they could do also is allow unjust enrichment claims, because I mean that's what has really happened. Not only do they do that when they let you get on, monetize their audience, and then they kick you off or somehow limit your reach, but really that's kind of happening in the personal information space. Also because they've been lying so repeatedly. Remember that lawsuit you covered with Facebook?
Oh yeah.
They've been lying repeatedly to people, which means to me, they've monetized our private information without our full knowledgeable consent, and sometimes by overt fraud. We should be able to get the economic reward for that rather than them. And of course, that would economically destroy them if it was ever enforced.
Well, and so now it might be, call it conspiratorial thought. Why would anyone trust the government to want to undo this as opposed to usurp this massive power? I mean, you say like break up.
My suspicion, because I had doubts that whether I said about 18 months ago, I thought this suit would happen because of who was getting together with the attorney generals in the states, with Barr's office. I thought Barr was sincere, but more importantly, what I did not disclose is that I know some of the people that are in that department in the antitrust division, and they are the real deal. So that's why I think this suit happened. It happened because there's some people that have been very, very patient. I mean, 20 years kind of patient, waiting for the opportunity to reinvigorate antitrust law in America, who are old, who believe in books like this, The Populist Moment, or Bad Money by Kevin Phillips, talking about what happened leading up to the crash of 28 and its political component. Both good books. They deeply believe in it, and they deeply believe in reinstating and reinvigorating the antitrust monopoly laws in a much broader way, and they were looking for the opportunity to do so, and now they're in a position to do so. So I think that their motivations for this suit are very legitimate. Okay. I think Google believes it can politically weasel its way out because they still have a lot of political connections across the country.
And they got a lot of cash also, and cash, if you don't have the connections, can get the connections.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to one I just saw. I'm not going to bring up the chat, just the comment, but it was about Whitmer. And now I actually, because you mentioned this, and I'm not familiar with these developments, but I'm curious, and I may have to do a follow-up. I've heard discussion about the accused in her kidnapping case. Strong discussion that they were in fact basically entrapped, and that it was the FBI sort of, I don't want to say orchestrating this, but setting it up to the point where they were setting it up to find people to do it. And the question becomes whether or not these individuals would have ever otherwise entertained the idea, but for the FBI egging them on. So what are the details? I don't know the details. I know the 30,000 foot overview.
So the basics are, if for entrapment law, is that because an undercover government agent incentivized or encouraged you to do something is why you did it. Now, it's a tough defense because you have to prove you never would have done it otherwise. But an honest investigation, the way they avoid an entrapment defense, is they never recommend, instigate, initiate, promote, support, or sponsor any illicit activity. They're just there to take information and process it and maybe play along at a low level, but they don't say, hey, let's go kill so-and-so. They don't say, let's go kidnap so-and-so. They don't say, hey, here's a means we could do so. Hey, what about using this weapon? Because once you do that, you're really getting into entrapment space. What the FBI knows is that you can approach any vulnerable, susceptible group of radicals, left, right, anywhere, and you can plant crazy ideas in their head and get them to, on paper, agree to things that they end up never doing and criminally prosecute them if you want. What's intriguing to me is that somehow magically the FBI has not managed to do this with anybody related to Antifa. I just find that fascinating. If anybody believes they're not really infiltrating Antifa, go back and watch the church committee hearings, and you can just Google church committee Klan member, because one of the lead members infiltrating the Klan for the purposes of instigating and motivating the Klan to do some of the most horrendous acts during the 1960s was an FBI agent. So there's a history of this. Two other good documentaries on this. One is the Newburgh Sting, which is Newburgh, and the other one that I'm familiar with is Better This World. Similar patterns. And it's also portrayed in the Showtime show in one of the seasons, Homeland. And when I think it's season 5, it's before they go off the rail. The last season was good. The next to last season was terrible because they became obsessed with Russiagate and all that nonsense. But the season before that was good, and it details where they basically they create the story. In other words, and so what looks like happened here from the early information that we're getting is that nobody came up with a plan to kidnap Whitmer. And not just one FBI agent, apparently 3 undercover law enforcement agents found a couple of nut jobs who were bragging on the internet, which, by the way, gives you an idea that these are not people who plan anything, right? And the real violent Antifa types, they don't put their face on camera. In fact, they beat up people that try to take photos of them at any level. that could be identifying. These guys were out saying crazy stuff on their little YouTube channels for forever. So that means they're a talker, not a doer anyway. So what happens is they infiltrate their group, the law enforcement does, and apparently the idea came from the feds. The feds were like, hey, wouldn't this be great? Wouldn't this send a real message? In fact, I know some people. I know how we can get to her house. I know how we can do this. Apparently, the only overt act ever taken to do this was to get near one of her vacation homes, number one, though apparently it's not clear they even ever scoped it out effectively.
Well, I'm suspecting the only reason they might have known any addresses would have been through the agents themselves.
Yes. They're the ones who are saying, hey, we can go here, we can get her at this location, let's go look at it. They're helping to organize the effort. They're orchestrating it. And then they recommend, hey, let's go get some weapons. And they make sure people go get weapons. And one person gets, I think, a stun gun. So that's the scope of it. That's the full way apparently it reached. This never reached actual actionable time frame that I can tell. And it appears all of it was cooked up by and it tells you where the FBI is. The FBI is hiding evidence in the Hunter Biden case, which involves one of the biggest scandals involving a major political candidate in American history because of the amount of money involved, the number of actors involved, the range of time period involved. They're burying that scandal while they're creating a fake scandal to indict a bunch of whack jobs or people that are a little off their meds in order to create a fake story of something that was never going to happen. In fact, as soon as I read it the first time, I was suspicious of it. So I was like, this reminds me of that bad Boston movie with Dan Aykroyd where they're going to kidnap a basketball player in order to save the Boston Celtics. And it had like quasi-comedic components to the story. And then when they were trying to spin it as a right-wing militia group, I'm familiar with a lot of those groups. I was like, this isn't really a right-wing militia group. These are a bunch of people whacking on, just talking on the internet that are a little bit off. That it sound more left, if anything, and they just really sound off, like the Boogaloo Boys. Those people are just mostly nuts. They're not on any political side that you can identify consistently. So it appears that this was totally made up. And they've done this. They've done this in terrorism cases. They've done this. I mean, what happened in the Better This World case, they got a couple of kids from Austin. One of them, by the way, is now a big Breitbart writer, was the rat informant for the government, Brandon Darby. Got a couple of kids, susceptible teenagers who said, hey, let's go bomb the Republican National Convention 2004. We're going to bring about the revolution, man, all that kind of jazz. They never actually took any meaningful action. They went further than these kids did. And it was clearly just one big entrapment because it was all plotted and planned by the government agent. There's several terrorism cases where they've done this. In order to make themselves look good that way, they broke up a big terrorist plot. They infiltrate some small group of susceptible-minded Muslims that attend, say, a radical cleric's place, but they're not obvious. A real terrorist cell, very hard to actually infiltrate. So what it is they get these susceptible kids to talk big, and then they arrest them all, and they say, hey, we just saved this building from being blown up, when there's often no evidence that was ever going to occur. The idea was initiated and instigated and propagated by the government agent themselves. So that's what it looks like really happened in Whitmer. While Whitmer's doing her 8645 message. Like, you want to talk about, here she's complaining about Trump somehow magically sending dog whistles to these kids who are clearly entrapped by the feds, while she's sending I don't even know, do you call that a dog whistle? When it says 8645?
Look, so the funny thing is we talk about bias and we talk about projection, but there's another theory that I view the world. Sorry, was it subject product? Okay, I thought I did something bad. I've realized that we can only view the world through the prism of our own knowledge. So I've never heard of 86. I've never heard of 86ing anybody. I worked at I worked at Second Cup. I've worked restaurants. I've never heard
86.
Never in my life. So I
heard it from the time I was a kid when I was a young waiter. It's like 86. So maybe it's more of an American thing. Well,
so that's the thing. And like I've asked people I know. I asked I don't want to ask. I don't want to say who I've asked, but I've asked people I know who've never heard it either. But it's probably a bad comparison because we're in a very close. Or my family members never heard 86. So I take for granted like no idea what 86 is. By the comment section. Maybe it's a sign of the people everyone who watches my channel. Everybody knew what 86 was, like hands down. Maybe there was 1 in 100 people who said never heard it before, and then maybe there were 5 in 100 who said, "Oh yeah, it's from the restaurant industry." But it seems that it was 95% of the people knew reflexively what it meant, going back to the 40s and 50s gangster movies. So I might be inclined to. But I still don't think she knew. I mean, that's the thing. I'm only imparting what my impression of her. Someone had to have known. I guarantee the people who started the campaign knew. That's why it was an edgy sort of double entendre. I still would think that she doesn't know. But my gosh, someone else, made an interesting observation. That the 8645 was under a pot of flowers, which could be representation in and of itself.
It was very, very interesting placement. So either she did it. We'll put it this way: whoever put that placement there knew what they were doing. Now, it may be the case that she wasn't the one who made that placement decision, but this was her big national news. For people who don't know, by the way, on national news, Whitmer goes out, and right behind her, underneath a little pot, is an 8645 little piece of whatever you call it. And 8645 was a movement that started this summer, and it has a quasi. You could say, oh, it means cancel. But everybody knows 86 knows it has a darker undercurrent of kill. And it's put this way. If Trump had put something out and if anyone had ever put out anything like 8644, that person would have been fired, canned, under investigation, all kinds of problems. If a Republican governor would have put 8644 behind him, CNN would be running constant loops of how black men had been lynched in the history of America. So it was interesting how the media treated it. Mostly the media ignored it and pretended it wasn't there, even though it was right there on their own broadcast, right behind her.
It was in your face, and it was egregious. The only thing you can, if I know people don't want to give Whitmer any benefit of the doubt, I would just assume everyone in her campaign knew sort of like a gag. Can we get away with it? But yeah, it's given the amount of people who unequivocally, I'm just going through the chat here, who unequivocally know what it meant. It's not a mistake that can happen by accidents, but
right.
Okay.
And the anger is just so high in that world. It's why Madonna could think she could say, "I have dreams of blowing up the White House." I mean, when she spoke in 2017,
she could say she's Madonna's Madonna. This is a governor of Michigan. It's next level in terms of unacceptability. So that's interesting.
Now, it may be the case that Whitmer was trying to get more people to do this. Because I'm very curious where the feds came up with this idea. It wouldn't surprise me if Whitmer's allies had allies at the FBI there in Michigan that created this whole thing. And she would like there to be maybe 2 or 3 more stories like this, because she wants to be the noble victim against the crazy Trumpist, while she just has to lock us all up in Michigan.
The timing of all of it was it's coincidental, and then sometimes there's no coincidences. But the entrapment argument, it's an interesting thing to follow. I mean, what do we expect? I mean, we would only find out about that.
They got some good lawyers. So they got some lawyers I know of in Wisconsin. So several of them got better extradition terms than Rittenhouse has yet to get. So skilled lawyers know how to handle those kind of things, and they got some good ones. So that's going to be a bigger fight. Normally, the reason why they never worry is because usually they pick nobodies. They pick people with no money who are just trying to be important in their own little space. Some of them will have mental issues, at least mental health issues of some type. They'll be off the res, at least some portion of the time. And the net effect of that is that normally they get railroaded easy. They have public defenders who don't really like them, don't really believe in them, let them get crushed. That didn't happen here, and they made a mistake.
So, do we know how the individuals are getting, let's say, quality representation?
They had some allies that surprised people.
Okay.
Also, Whitmer doesn't understand the degree of people who dislike her, that are very suspect of anything she does. So there's people with, I'll give you a little comparison. Trump is outraising Biden in almost every county in Michigan. So this assumption that Michigan really loves Whitmer, and there's a lot of signs that say otherwise. That we'll see on election night, but don't be surprised if Michigan turns red again.
Okay, that's interesting. It's an interesting. That was one of the. There's a market to bet on that if anybody's interested. So the next, what we're going to see, and I'm just bringing up some chats about other 86s that people now are putting together.
Yes.
What do we see? We're not going to see the defensive entrapment until this gets to trial. There's not going to be much of a social media.
There's some smart lawyers involved, so you'll start seeing it raised early. You'll see it. To some degree, it was discussed, I believe, in one of the extradition proceedings already, where the defendant got very favorable terms. You'll see it in getting more favorable bail terms. You'll see it in discovery. Don't be shocked if I'm right if this case magically disappears 6 months from now after the election.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's very interesting. It's to be followed, and I guess we'll talk about it again later on. Okay, we're going to be running out of time soon, but until we get there, these two issues are sort of intertwined. The billboard in New York put up by the Lincoln Project with, and I'm calling it an altered photo or a doctored photo, with Ivanka Trump looking like she's holding the sign, but they've removed the Goya can of beans from her hand that was in the original. Next to it is Jared Kushner with the comment that he made about New Yorkers are going to get punished or they're going to suffer. Above it are the numbers of New York deaths and overall COVID deaths in the United States. What was the punishment? And basically just attributing that to Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Okay, so first of all, I mean, I guess I didn't know who the Lincoln Project was. I sort of know who they are. Who are they, though, for people who don't know who the Lincoln Project is?
A group of consultants who claim to be, and many of them were, Republican political consultants who are against Trump. Now, I'll tell you who they are. They're a bunch of grifters and scam artists. So that's what a lot of the political consulting class is. So they're just looking for money, and they knew they could hustle a bunch of Democratic money by saying, "Hey, I'm a former Republican consultant. I'll bash Trump for you. Will you give us millions of dollars?" And that's exactly what's happened. I think the last report was that most of the money that they've raised has gone to them personally, not to the political campaign TV efforts that money was supposedly raised on behalf of. Funny how the Southern District of New York doesn't find that to be criminal. And there's an actual nexus here because they're, of course, now advertising in the Southern District of New York. And what they did is they put up in a billboard about Jared Kushner that quoted him out of context and claimed that he wanted the deaths of all these people in New York. Clearly false.
No, I mean, no reasonable person would even read that out of context quote and read it to that mean that. I clearly already read it in terms of knowing the intent behind it. But
right, but
that's my bias, and I like Jared Kushner even though I don't know him from a hole in the wall. But
easiest to prove libel case that I've seen in a while. So I mean, they attribute a statement to him without sourcing it that is false in its allocation and relationship to what they're saying he said, what he was talking about. Same with Ivanka. So like they're being all big and bold. I think they did it deliberately. I think that their goal was to get media attention to the story by spreading a fake news story, by getting Kushner upset to the degree that he might sue them, because they're mostly hoping and praying, and someone's probably given them the wrong advice, that they cannot be sued individually, but that the Lincoln Group will be sued and it will be out of money after the election. That's what it's a frightening news strategy. Deliberately libel someone to spread a fake news media story because don't worry, you can't be sued because your campaign will be broke by the time you get sued.
And but you could go after directors. I presume, could you go after the directors?
There's a lot of ways to go after those individuals because they're assuming they're a lot more immune than they are. I would claim the individuals are deliberately and directly responsible for the statement, sue them by name. Now, not to, maybe add the Lincoln Group, but just say that this was their conspiratorial means by which they did so. I would even look at other potential theories you might have here because there might be more than just this that you could go after. There's some tortious interference theories that might be applicable. There's some other conspiracy to commit tort theories that may be available. So I would include the fact that they're basically scam artists who should be criminally prosecuted if there was an honest Southern District of New York. I would go after them across the board. But I was getting these idiots responding to me saying stuff like, they were quoting a quote from another newspaper. And two things with that. One, just because there's a quote here doesn't allow you to misattribute it to a different context or in another subject. Secondly, how did all these people, even a New York Times writer responded to me asking this? And I was like, did you not read the judge's order denying the motion to dismiss against the New York Times in the Sandman case, which specifically laid out that if you're quoting someone else and that quote is a lie, you are responsible too? It's amazing what journalists don't even seem to know. This is why I always recommend suing them individual, right? All these journalists are paying no attention to what's happening in the Sandman case because they're not worried because no journalist was named individually. They don't worry about that. That's insurance company, whatever. That's why you sue them individually. You notice that the corrections and retractions were more complete in the Amy Cooper case. That's because I have a reputation of suing people individually. And I've told people, if you get anything about that case wrong, I'm going to sue you personally. I'm not going to sue your employer. I'm not suing the insurance company. I'm coming for your reputation and your house. So that's what motivates them to care more about the truth. But it tells you how bad they are, that they didn't realize just because you read something somewhere doesn't mean you get to repeat the libel. And then someone else was like, It's funny these days. Politically, the First Amendment apparently exempts you if you're criticizing your political opponent. So, if you're criticizing your political opponent, somehow that's magically immune. No, it's not. If you're libeling someone, it's libel, and it doesn't matter where the politics falls. So Kushner has a very good claim, and I think, and Ivanka Trump does too. Kushner even stronger. But don't know whether he'll pursue it or not. But but I think it's worthwhile. I would go after them individually. Return the favor to these guys.
It was beyond disgusting because it's beyond disgusting.
It was a vicious libel. It said that he wanted, welcomed, rewarded, encouraged, and helped promote the death of hundreds of thousands of people.
And when I say it's the most vile type of accusation, in the propaganda war, the worst thing that you really can do is, and not accuse your enemies of what you're doing to create confusion. Accuse your enemies of the atrocities that you are responsible for. It's been done all time and time again, using the images of the victims by the people who perpetrated it in the information battle, when people republish these images, not knowing they're in fact the product of the people claiming to be the victim. The fact that they would go after Ivanka and Jared for what is overtly, and this is not a political stance either, a policy failure by Governor Cuomo and the city mayor to a lesser extent, but mostly Cuomo, mostly from sending COVID positive patients back to nursing homes and requiring it by law, as we've discussed, and you made me realize, immunizing the facilities before. To go then and take that failing of that governor and try to blame it on your political adversary in a billboard in Times Square, it is nauseating. It doesn't make me jaded or cynical. That's just the game, but it's disgusting.
Yeah, it's gutter level politics to a whole different degree, and that's why I'd go after them. Go after all of them. And they're media protected groups of people. They're all grifters. They deserve to be exposed for the grifters they are, and make them pay some consequence financially and personally for these illicit behaviors, and to educate everyone else who might think about it in the future as a critical public deterrent. That's why I took the case for all the Covington kids that I represent, was to go after people individually to deter other people from doing it. And just the threat of suit got very famous, powerful people to retract and correct. So you can find ways to achieve that same objective by doing so. And so the one thing that actually gets the press's attention is a potential personal liability suit. So, and I think the same thing with it's borderline with Borat, but I think Borat could be sued for libel. About the Giuliani case, I think a lot of the press could be sued for libel because it was misinterpreted and misrelayed what took place there.
I said that might be my next follow-up, because I don't like feeling stupid, but I should not have. I feel stupid for even having relied on a detailed description of the actual scene from the film in Global News, is as reputable news as we get in Canada. It was either CBC or Global. I think it was Global, because I really don't ever quote CBC. So let's work into that one now. The media depiction of that, I don't know in retrospect now if they were depicting something that they had never seen, so they're just depicting what someone else depicted, or if they had all seen the scene and depicted it in a way that would be technically correct by the purest wording of it. He did have his hands down his pants. He was in a bedroom, but describing it in a way that is so grotesquely inaccurate as opposed to what actually transpired that it would be defamatory. But
and they omitted context. The reason why they apparently screened this movie over a month ago, and nobody came out with this story. So this was solely payback to Giuliani. If people watch the documentary Plot Against the President, look at all the attacks that happened on David Nunes, look at what happens to his staff. This is what the media does to anyone that causes them political difficulty. They do personal assassination, campaign, character assassination attempts on those individuals. And anytime Giuliani has stuck his head up for Trump, there's been a personal attack, professional attack within days. They'll say he's under criminal investigation. They'll say this is happening. They'll say that's happening, whatever it is. And here you had all of a sudden a reinterpretation of that Borat component, which is already problematic. And the other thing, I think the good point you made, how does Cohen, the writer director of Borat, how does he get away with this extreme ethnic prejudice that he promotes? Because the whole movie Borat is ethnic prejudice, period.
No,
it's inexcusable.
The whole and the thing I said is, in my head watching this movie, the only one espousing these I say, exceptions aside, because they take clips and you can have a clip of, I don't even want to say the words from the first one, but really the only racist person in the entire movie is Borat. And he has to be the offensive thing in the hopes of getting some sort of affirmative reaction out of the people around him. But,
look how he portray. I mean, it's one thing if he was portraying like a fictional country or something, but he's portraying the actual country of Kazakhstan. I mean, imagine if he was portraying a country in Africa, a country in Central America. The left would be up in arms because this is extreme bigotry towards a whole country. I mean, just of the most nasty kind. And yet somehow he's this champion of wokeness. Now, of course, I did enjoy the fact that he got censored when he's been one of the biggest people calling for censorship. I disagree with all forms of censorship still, even for him, but he's been such a hypocrite on it. And there's some stuff he does that's funny when he suckers people in. The Ali G stuff I thought was really good. But I never liked the Borat one because I was like, this is just playing on ethnic prejudice of a group. Almost nobody knows anybody from Kazakhstan. It's like, this is just vicious, nasty, class-riddled.
I actually know someone. I know someone personally, half Kazakh and half Eastern European. Okay, no, but I've had questions about at what point can he get in trouble for using footage that he's not entitled to use? Now, so New York does not have a false light law, a false light tort, so there's no way that Giuliani could sue Borat for false light.
You can sue in any state though, because the film is shown everywhere.
Very good point. Okay, not Borat. I'm sorry, Giuliani.
Sue Borat, he could sue Cohen for false light, and he could sue all these media people for lying, because what they did is they lied by omission. If they would have told the accurate story, a person interviewed Rudy Giuliani, the person interviewing asked him to go into a separate room, had him take off the mic, at which point he was pulling down on his pants when he took off the mic, and then Sacha Cohen came in screaming something, and Giuliani left.
Oh,
right? And you don't have a scandal anymore if it's honestly rendered.
Oh, and there was even more to the context than that, because I've been discussing it with family and friends, and someone said, the way he pat her on the back or on the butt. I said, well, first of all,
actually, it was a bad. I was like, when I saw that, I was like, okay, Rudy doesn't think anything's going to happen here.
No, when I saw that,
it's okay, honey, on the very sort of politely and diplomatically.
No, and exactly, and what people don't know from
Biden would have handled it differently.
No comment for me, but from the context, for anybody who had watched it, you would have known that she was purportedly feeling bad because she thought she had blown the interview, and he was saying, "Don't worry about it, it's okay." The whole thing, it's just it made me feel sick.
They pretended that he knew she was 15. He knew there was no reason for him to think that. The other guy came in, Cohen came in screaming she's 15. He doesn't know what's going on.
Apparently,
fake news.
No, and apparently he called the cops after the incident when Borat came in screaming that, because he didn't know what was going on. It was, I felt stupid. I feel stupid for even having thought that, Giuliani just thought he was going to get lucky with a reporter. And then I see the scene, it's like, this is not what's happening at all. And I've been duped by believing that the descriptions of people who purportedly and probably did see the scene before reporting on it all said, okay, well, we're going to do it. The damage will be done by the time people watch this for whoever watches it. And no one's going to remember in 3 weeks. And they're not.
And the best evidence of that is apparently they had all seen this in a pre-screening, a whole bunch of the media folks, a month and a half ago. So, and they didn't say anything. So in other words, they knew it didn't mean what they would later lie about. They saw Giuliani was hurting Biden, so they wanted to pay him back by misinterpreting the Borat script. And then Borat was happy to jump on it because that will promote his movie. But him doing this a second time, everybody should be much more critical. I was like, how does such obvious bigotry get a green slip? Get a permission slip? This is just bigotry. Just change the name. Change it from Kazakhstan to African American. Change it to Mexican American. Change it to any other country. Well, you can probably make fun of Canadians. That's still okay.
Well, South Park would lose a lot of gags if they weren't allowed to. No, it was over the top. It was over the top. The media misrepresentation.
It's just mean. It's unnecessarily mean. It's like there's a difference between good. If you want to make fun of powerful people, like when he did Ali G, he got Dick Thornburg, Attorney General. He got Andy Rooney, who is a racist, from interactions I had with him, the old CBS 60 Minutes guy. All of that's fair game. Don't make fun of a poor country that very few people know of that's just mean and vicious. That's just being mean and vicious because you have more power than they do. So I have zero. That's why I, if Giuliani or somebody else, I would sue Cohen just because because he doesn't deserve the credibility he's gotten. He deserves a lot more criticism. Comedy, fine. You don't need to be vicious and mean to vulnerable people and vulnerable populations.
Well, it was what was I about to say? Instead of suing Borat, suing Sacha Baron Cohen. Okay, so like some people say, well, they've signed up for it. They sign away their rights, when they know they're going to appear in a documentary. Now, there's two things I'm thinking. They do, but they don't sign off for a camera in the bathroom while they might be doing whatever they want, thinking they have privacy. They didn't sign up for cameras. Wait, go ahead.
Fraud in the inducement. I don't know how any of those contracts are enforceable because they're lied to in order to get them to sign it. So they lied about a protest. They lied to a protest group to try to embarrass a lockdown protest group. I guarantee they lied to them. So how's that contract enforceable? So they lied to them to get them to sign it. And for folks who don't know, a contract is no good if you committed fraud to induce someone in order to sign the contract. So it's one of the underutilized torts out there because people think they can hide. Oh, I have a contract. Not if you lied to get me to sign it.
And that thing is like I know some of the I've never read the contracts, but I know that some of the inducements with Ali G, for example, I've watched all of it. I actually have it on DVD as well. He would pitch it not as an outright lie at the time. He would say, the guy's going to come on. He's going to look different than what you're ordinarily used to seeing him as. He's sort of an inner city geared individual doing interviews for the inner city. And that's how he would pitch it. And then he would proceed to, ask Coop, who was it? The Surgeon General, what his chances are of dying. That's legitimate humor. And that was funny. And, that's
not what they did with Giuliani. And I mean, there's no one who can, the whole Kazakhstan country can't sue for his, constant defamation of their entire population. But it doesn't excuse it morally. But on the legal side, when you lie and then do something to cause someone's deliberate embarrassment, and that's the goal from the get-go, and they're not some high-profile public figure who's just embarrassed by the nature of the question or something else, then I think you're running into risky territory. And he's been sued before, by the way. They often settle many of these cases.
I would not. I would not mind if he got sued. It was the movie was bad faith. The movie. What I find the ultimate irony is he's making fun of the people. By exceptions aside, he's making fun of people who are showing him hospitality. And it's just like it's easy to make fun of people. It's easy to exploit people. It's easy to sort of like entrap them into saying something stupid. Like in the first one, getting frat boys drunk in a car and then running the footage in the movie. It's easy to do that. And I was telling someone today, capture anybody's stupidest 45 seconds to a minute, like you say, you could ruin their life and nobody would want that. But
and there's a difference between big public figures and these random people he's attacking. I see that as very, very different. If you get Trump to say something dumb on Trump, even Giuliani, if you get him saying something dumb, fine. It's just don't create a fake story and then lie about him to the world. Where he's trying to be nice to someone who appears to be upset, where you're using his kindness against him. You know who did figure him out within 10 seconds? He got an interview with Trump.
I was just saying, I think it was Andy Rooney walked out as well very quickly. Andy Rooney? Who was it? Andy Rooney walked out of him on
Rooney kept talking. Because he brilliantly made fun of Rooney's obsessed with words and is a racist. And he kept saying, "Mr. Rooney, you're a racialist," and it drove Rooney crazy.
I know you're right. I remember that. Who?
So that's the good stuff. I respect the humor when it's directed at people with more power. I don't respect the humor when it's directed at people without power. And he's done too much of it, and he needs to start getting culturally and socially slapped around for it. And he just lied about. He promoted the Giuliani thing on a bogus script, on a bogus narrative. And as you've pointed out, there's problems with the editing in terms of the timing of when words are put in there. And that's a problem. And he can be sued anywhere because he's releasing a film worldwide. So I think that's relevant. What is Trump sat down and within 5 seconds ended the interview. So Trump is like, no, you're not legit. We're out of here. So that's where Trump's instincts are unparalleled.
All right. What did we miss? I think we got to everything, Robert?
That's right. I think briefly on Chauvin on the Floyd case. It looks to me like they don't have either a second degree or third degree murder charge. It looks like they may only have manslaughter because apparently there isn't real reckless homicide in Minnesota. The way they interpret reckless homicide, it's only reckless if you are trying to kill multiple, or you are posing risk to multiple people. If it's directed at one person, it can only be charged as manslaughter. And the judge dismissed the second degree, left third degree in place, but I don't think he got some basic stuff confused. The judge did, because these judges are so linear. They tend to not understand the conceptual history of things. Like, for example, he really thinks as a cause matter that the fentanyl overdose has to be a, quote, intervening cause, when it just has to be the cause. It doesn't have to be an intervening, but he got confused with the intervening cause language, because that's the way these sort of linear judges think. But in looking at it, it looks like they don't have a second degree or third degree murder charge under the law of Minnesota, because it's kind of unique. So I think he may end up, when this case is all said and done, may only end up going to trial on manslaughter. Now, right now, it's either second. No, I think second got kicked. It's third in manslaughter. I think.
I believe second degree. From what you sent me, was second degree got eliminated.
Well, it was right, because there is no traditional reckless homicide apparently in Minnesota. In Minnesota, the nature of the reckless homicide has to pose a risk to multiple people.
Wait,
so
just so nobody accuses you of having gotten this wrong. It might have been the third degree that got dismissed.
Yeah, it was either second or third that got dismissed.
Yeah. Third degree was dismissed. Okay.
But I think second and third should get dismissed based on reading the law. I didn't realize that law was that weak. And they didn't charge him with first degree. So they're not saying it's intentional. Here's the problem with the they charged him. Yes, that's right. Third degree is reckless. Second degree, I believe, is felony murder. Here's the problem. I assume they were charging some form of like kidnapping, something like that, false imprisonment. They're charging him with assault as the felony, and the judge got it totally wrong. The felony has to be a separate felony. So you can't say, you committed felony murder because you pointed a gun at someone, shot it, and that was an unauthorized use of a gun, and that's the felony, and we'll charge you because a murder happened because of it, to get around the intentional requirements of murder. So normally a felony murder is I was committing bank robbery, and somebody died. Some other crime. I was doing a drug deal. Somebody died. In the case in Georgia, Arbery, it was basically false imprisonment, that they had falsely arrested him. So I assumed they were going to allege something like that. They didn't. They said that the assault that led to his death was the felony that is the felony murder. And the judge totally misunderstood how separate that has to be. So based on law, it looks to me like they don't have either second degree or third degree murder against any of the officers in that case. It looks like they only have manslaughter. It
looks like it's going in the direction that, I'm fairly certain this was the direction that you had predicted it might go down the line, but we'll see. It's the case is being chiseled away and the charges are being chiseled away. Yes. Now, Karen Strawn put up a chat, said, Viva Fry. My husband tells me that Kamala Harris was just caught campaigning outside a polling station, which is apparently illegal. Though I saw some other comments about that as well. I haven't heard.
The rule is you can't do any political activity within 100 feet of, and that, sometimes it varies, but that's usually the law. So so she may have broken the 100 feet rule, which is, they don't really do a lot with, to be honest with you, but it is illegal.
All right, we're going to miss 14,000 again tonight. I am not going to complain about the viewership. This is amazing that we have so many people watching this live. Topo Musical says, things we know. I'm going to let everyone read them.
Epstein didn't kill. Eternal truth. Epstein did not kill himself. Sally Yates is corrupt. Watch Plot Against the President. Details part of that corruption. And as to the other ones, I'm in agreed. But those are my only two eternal truths. We may add some in the future.
And everybody can read the other ones. I'll read the last one. This channel rocks. Thank you very much, Topo. Okay, and we got a new member who I just lost right here. Welcome to the channel. Ford, forced name change. I think we did a good job tonight, Robert. What else? There's nothing else. If we miss something, we'll get to it next week. This is amazing. So the big news that we're following for the week. Flynn, there's going to be a decision tomorrow, which we probably, not a decision, sorry. There's going to be something tomorrow. We probably won't hear much about it, but it might be covered in the news. Supreme Court decisions. Amy Coney Barrett's vote tomorrow, supposed to be tomorrow evening. And
it looks like she will definitely pass. And so I thought the Democrats would do more opposition to her substantively. They chose to use her nomination to go after the House, the Senate, and the presidency instead. And there's more big business backing. I thought she would have it, but not to the scale that she turned out to have. And that intimidates both parties in Washington. I'm
just going to screenshot this. Terry Ebert Mendoza, thank you very much. Now, Robert, my thought is, what do you think of the prospect that the Democrats are going to say, we didn't fight tooth and nail like we did with Kavanaugh, and therefore that's going to be our justification for packing the courts if and when?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no question if they win, they're going to pack the court. They're going to weaponize every means of power. I mean, they already are. I mean, when you see things like somebody gets fired from their 911 job because of a response to somebody else's post on their private Facebook page that they delete a few hours later, then you get a sense of how willingness they are to weaponize anything and everything. And so it's scary, and they're willing to rewrite the law to get there. So there's problems on aspects of the right. I'm not a Barrett fan, as I've made clear, but still a lot less dangerous, in my view, than the willingness of people on the left to weaponize everything available to them: human resources, advertising, hiring, the court system, the legal system, the law enforcement choices, prosecutorial actions. It's why they've driven people like me, who've been independent, would have, mostly self-identified as to the left most of my life. Though I've always been populist, so that doesn't really fit on the political spectrum in a convenient way. You can read The Populist Moment to figure that out. They terrify me these days. Where the left is going is just terrifying, and I think it will show up on election day in ways that will not help their political cause. Hopefully.
And may we never have to deal with this. I mean, the question would be, what would be the remedies or the opposition to packing the courts if and when?
There could be a third eternal truth. Legal Eagle put out his video about the rule of law and how the rule of law requires you to vote Biden this year. And he started off talking about when I was a child. Well, what I knew when I was a child is an eternal truth. Number 3 is that Legal Eagle is an idiot.
I haven't seen this video. I might go see it. I'm never going to respond to a political video like that, because either side, I don't think people should be telling people who they're voting for in the attempt to try to sway them. The vote is a very personal thing.
What he really means by rule of law, going to this issue of court packing, is rule of lawyers and rule of a particular class of lawyers, because they don't care about the rule of law. They're gutting the rule of law everywhere. It's what's driving people like me to be more politically active, opposing their objective and interest. They don't care about the Flynn case is the rule of law. What happened in Roger Stone's case is rule of law. What happened to President Trump is rule of law. What Peter Strzok or James Comey or Andrew McCabe did was rule of law. What James Clapper or John Brennan did in lying under oath to Congress, that was rule of law. I mean, what a crock. He wants rule of lawyers, and that's what we don't need. Shakespeare was partially right, with a few exceptions. The rest of the lawyers, you take care of first.
Jay Mills says Flynn's op-ed in the Western Journal is a great read, and if you haven't watched the UFC champ Jorge Masvidal short vid on the Donald Trump YouTube channel, it's a must-watch. I saw Jorge. I think I saw Cernovich retweeted. It's a good speech. I mean, it's a good speech. Jason L., if I donate another $5, will you and Barnes do an election night special?
I may be out of the country then. Depends. Everybody's got crazy rules. I may not be able to. I may have to sneak into one of these countries, but usually I'm unavailable on election night. But there's always an outside chance I'm of it, but highly unlikely.
And once bitten, twice shy. I'm never going to try to do a live stream reaction thing on my channel where it involves playing a television in the background, because if YouTube's looking for a good reason, you rebroadcast a commercial that you didn't have the rights to, they'll give you a strike right away. So I may not do it on my channel, but I'll participate somewhere if I get invited. Who am I looking for? Tim Pool, I would go to. Crowder, Dave Rubin. I'll go on someone else's channel who can do it safely. And Owen Jones says, I guess we can end it on this. Barnes, book and movie recommendation of the week. New Confessions of E.H.M. has me confused. Is Perkins saying that USA was the villain of the 20th century? We did things that were terrible and I hate, but we also did good.
I mean, Perkins now comes from the left, but I wouldn't use it for purposes of good or bad as to countries. I would use it to understand modus operandi. In other words, how do NGOs really operate? What is their goal and objective? How do they create influence? Because once you know that, you can sort of know how Biden family corruption would play in. It gives you context for how foreign policy operates and how disparate influence certain institutional actors have. So his first book is good on that too. Now he comes at it from his own left ideological perspective. You can draw your own conclusions from that, but I don't use it for that purpose. I use it for the purpose of understanding how does power operate without even putting a political or moral judgment on it. It's the reason why I like Elroy's trilogy, American Tabloid, The Cold 6000, the Death of a Rover. I'm doing the last title, but just look up James Elroy, American Tabloid Trilogy. And I use it simply as a template to understand power, not necessarily Ray Donovan, a great Showtime series. I'm not endorsing anything that happens in Ray Donovan. I'm just saying it's very useful to understand how power works. And you can morally ascribe whatever judgment you want, left or right, as you wish. But that's separate from just understanding how the system actually works. The same with shows like The Wire and Homeland and Billions, all great shows that the Fargo series, which has a great comedic quality, that there's a new season up now on FX. But often it will help detail how power operates. Many of these series do, and more realistically than what you'd learn in a book or in law school or in an academic book, a civics book kind of thing. What else? There was one. I think I mentioned everything else that I had in terms of books or movies. So the Populist Moment, great book to put American politics into context. Anything by Kevin Phillips, always good to understand American political culture, economic culture, how it interacts with things like monopoly law, libel law, any of these other things that we've talked about. Always have a political component and political context that are important to understand and appreciate to be able to assess it realistically and forecast accordingly.
Someone asked a question actually before we go, because I'm actually very, very curious. Oh, any word on Epstein and Maxwell? Follow up. We're going to talk about that later on. No time tonight. And we'll end it with this. Someone had asked, can you change your vote if you voted early?
Yes, you can. It depends on the state. So just research it. But often you can go in. That's why a bunch of people were Googling it after the debate. I mean, how many there's a debate or there's a further dispute or controversy about how many were. But yes, in many states you can.
Okay, very cool. I actually thought the answer was going to be no. Reflexively, I'd never even thought to look into it. I don't know if people have voters' remorse now, seeing the way things are going. Okay, we're gonna wind it down now. Everybody, thank you very much yet again. Amazing, 12,000 people watching, and there will never not be something to talk about. It's just for good or bad.
Crazy time, particularly from a legal political perspective. Right. The Trump era has been incredible for the intersection of law and politics.
And it was a blessing to have met you through this venture that I started. It's amazing. Robert, thank you. Everyone, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Robert and I are going to stick around and say our proper goodbyes. That's it. See you next week and see you in the